Ladies and or gentlemen, many of you are aware that one of the aspects of who I am that really sinks into me is Magic the Gathering, and truthfully, it used to be hard to find people to cover in this series in that space, because we're all a bunch of nerds that like to go into way too much detail, so there's rarely even something I can add to what the person is saying without just making a whole different video on the subject entirely, which, to be honest, I'm tempted to get into in the future more than I already have, but that's for another discussion. However, there's a way I put that some of you may have noticed. Used to. Now, part of that is because of the fact that people presenting information that was dubious at best were, quite frankly, the vast minority of MTG's content creation, and most of the time those people were so well known that it wasn't even worth covering them, especially when I've already talked about Desolator Magic plenty, and the quartering for that matter. I still stand by that, though. Most of the community tends to be the much more articulate even when making points I don't agree with, at least in terms of actual influential people in the sphere. But, well, those who make bad points are simply easier to find now, and part of that comes from the fact that Magic the Gathering is becoming more and more popular, especially with the collaboration with other properties becoming an inherent part of the game, which admittedly isn't going to be part of this particular video, but is still a factor. And that is where I introduce the Magic Historian, previously known as MTG Purple, otherwise known as My Catcher, which is not me doxing him. That is literally the name on his Patreon and on his Stream Archive channel, along with others. He's one of the channels that I feel epitomizes the current exposure of a lot of these reactionary takes to the state of Magic, and, well, truthfully, represents a ton of the elements of what I'm talking about in this video that wasn't really originally what I was going to say in this video, but given recent events have become far more prevalent and problematic to the point where the original tone of this video was going to take no longer feels appropriate. But let me summarize where my original take was going here. Magic Historian doesn't feel like a passionate creator that enjoys Magic, but rather like he's rage-baiting content farm that has a few real opinions about Magic sprinkled in that seem to contradict one another at convenient times. Admittedly, my evidence of this was a little bit more dubious than I would like, but when I lost a ton of progress because of having to change computers and, well, 2024 being generally shit to me in the second half, it put the timing perfect to be able to expose a major aspect of this that I kind of get at in the video, but I could only be so direct about without a little bit more evidence. See, in the final thoughts, I point out that it was possible that the way Mike spread information about what was going on in the game may very well be unintentional, but that didn't make it any less dangerous and should still be brought to public attention for what it could do. When you get people angry in order to get them to your video, see, it's incredibly effective to the point where it's part of the reason why me playing up how angry something makes me work so well. It's simply easier to catch people's attention that way, but there's a difference between a responsible content creator who attempts to contextualize that attitude responsibly and actively condemns those who would take it beyond the point of performative outrage, and what I'm talking about here. This is something that Mike has experience, and to be honest, the most recent of these incidents was 3 years ago, so I don't think it's worth dredging up too many details. I will talk about it more later, but we'll touch on that. But let's just say he's been the target of outrage that goes beyond words in a very real sense on a couple of occasions. And this is where I would have to introduce the topic of discussion, the bannings of 4 cards from the Commander format that, as would turn out, the eventual functional dissolution of the Commander Rules Committee, with Wizards of the Coast taking over the governance of the format, citing a campaign of threats against the Rules Committee members as the chief reason, as one of, if not most certainly, the chief catalyst. Now, Mike would eventually talk about these threats and say this about them.
So, this right here is a massive problem. And Wizards of the Coast is absolutely right when they say that far too many of the comments that were made were harmful or malicious. I want to address the fact that I have had multiple people say to me in person or in comments that they don't actually believe that the Rules Committee members were threatened and they were just making it up. But I absolutely assure you they were, and they were given a ton of these. I know just from my own personal experience, first of all, that people have said awful things to and about me all the way up to end-of-life level situations. It is mind-blowing to see it, but this is on a much bigger scale.
And this is absolutely a correct thing to point out, although I think an aspect of the tone of what he's saying is, well, it just strikes me as the wrong way. There are more things that he said. I didn't want to elongate the clip too much. You can watch the whole thing for yourself if I don't wind up playing more of it, or if you want to hear it in full. But throughout what he says, he kind of implies that this behavior should be considered unacceptable, but doesn't actually say it. He says things like it's shocking to see it, and the people who defend it exist, without actually saying those people are wrong either, but instead using other bits of language to indicate that's what he means. And while he very well could. See, a lot of people know me for being able to highlight small word choices that indicate a hidden meaning in what people are saying, and while those do indicate that he very much doesn't justify the threatening behavior launched to members of the RC or any defense of them, I think it's also important to point out when something like this should be said overtly, but isn't, which is what I feel happens here. But that sort of takes me back to the comment he made in his video on the commander bans in the first place. He released a video on this the day after I did, which is incredibly relevant, believe it or not, because it follows along the timeline of things. Because, well, it would be entirely possible that he didn't know about the threats at the time of the video because I didn't when I made mine. I think it's also possible that he did and just didn't call it out as uncalled for, which he very much should have been doing if he's going to be critical of this decision in the way that he is. Especially when you look at what several of those criticisms are, which is the main thing I'm going to be covering.
It's an absolutely insane day in the world of Magic the Gathering. There has just been a massive market crash that is accompanied by a ton of Magic players straight up abandoning the game. This has to do with the recent commander bannings, which have caused a ton of damage to the game, have far-reaching consequences, and the game may actually never recover from this.
I want everyone to take note of how he presents this cold open here. The financial aspect of what is going on is, apparently, much more of a headline than the fact that staples of the format are no longer able to be played in that format. That's telling of his attitude going forward in the video. So anyway, I now need to give a trigger warning for, nuclear levels of cringe.
Magic. I am a wizard! History. I'm an old wizard! The magic historian. My bones hurt.
Okay, so I'm gonna be real with you. To a certain extent, I feel like this is intended to be shitty and laughed at. I get that. But it just doesn't hit that sweet spot to really fall into stylistic suck very well. And instead dives down to the point where it's just bad. And really doesn't work for what your channel is. Like, the channel chiefly uploads videos that show current events, including a lot more coverage of upcoming spoilers than you might expect from a channel touting itself as history-based, and would really make more sense as either a lore-focused channel, which used to be something that was on the channel but got muscled out onto a separate channel called Fantasy Geographic, which is a much better name, by the way, or something looking into the events that happened in the past in Magic, perhaps with current events coverage, talking in terms of historical context more often than what I see Mike do. A little bit like what Nikachu does, maybe with a little bit of a different tone, as it were. It just doesn't fit what you do, other than being just a general statement on the type of boomer imagery that you provide. It's not inherently a problem, but it's a lot closer of one when you put so much emphasis on the history thing. And being a historian doesn't mean you're old!
Greetings! Owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles, my friends!
He does this in every single video. Yes, even after the other intro and the cold open. This feels very much like the 2016 version of making sure that you have a catchphrase to start your video, rather than, you know, the 2024 version of making sure you have a catchphrase to start your video. Which fits, considering a glance back shows that he's been using this essentially since the beginning, and the cadence eventually became this over-exaggerated mess. I'm aware how laughable that sounds from the guy who put 3 minutes of whatever's in the lore, I'm not supposed to know that yet at the beginning of this video. But there's a difference here worth highlighting, as Mike's ritualistic part of the beginning of his videos totals out to close to a minute, where the actual ritual involved in what I do, namely the ladies and or gentlemen allow me to introduce, takes about 10 seconds at the most and flows naturally into introducing what I'm actually about to talk about. While my cold open skits both expand on the lore and serve as an attention-grabbing aspect of the video right out of the gate. There's really no perfect way of going about this. Some people are going to criticize the way I do it, I'm sure. I pretty much know they will. They have in the past. But, well, my point is that this definitely isn't it, and maybe a less exaggerated delivery is the way to go forward with this.
You're allowed to swear.
Okay, cool.
We bleep it. Watch this.
Fuck!
That out of the way, let's talk about the pure insanity of this situation. Now, unless you are living under a rock, you know about the recent commander bans. 4 cards were banned, and it's funny because I sat there and tried to remember the 4 cards, and I'm like, okay, Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, Dockside Extortionist, what was the 4th card? And then it was like, oh yeah, it's Nadu, because Nadu being banned, even though it was designed for Commander recently and just got printed, is a complete footnote to this conversation.
You're very right. Nobody's really got a problem with Nadu's banning because the card was just plain too powerful, and Wizards had even already admitted that they made a mistake in printing this card. Keep that in mind, though, because I can guarantee you, he's not actually going to.
So throw Nadu off to the side. It's 100% about those other 3 cards, which all had big, fat, hefty price tags. And especially in the case of Jeweled Lotus, has become completely obsolete. The other cards you can play in other formats, and in the most technical sense, you can use Jeweled Lotus in other formats too, but it literally is a Black Lotus designed to give you mana to cast your commanders. So, the Commander Rules Committee came out of what felt like nowhere and said, guess what? We are doing a mega ban hammer slam and hitting multiple of these cards. And the outcry has been tremendous.
Okay, they didn't hit multiple of these cards, Mike. They hit all the cards you brought up. That's why you were mentioning them by name. What the fuck is this wording? And by the way, speaking from experience, there's pretty much always outrage when cards get banned. In every game, people hate seeing the cards they've been using no longer allowed in a format, or the exploits they were taking advantage of being addressed. And the majority of people tend to fail to see the forest for the trees, to realize the health of the game as a whole is more important than their enjoyment in an unhealthy metagame. You're about to get into the reason that the outcry was so big, other than the normal reasons it would be, so I won't go too far into it right now, but trust me, there's soon going to be plenty for me to talk about.
First of all, whenever something like this happens, you have a number of people who just try and dump all their cards that they have. So it's like, boom, I'm just straight up getting rid of my collection. So that starts to add extra supply to the market, which drops prices. But this has been a mad dash to try and dump off things like Jeweled Lotus, obviously the cards that have been banned specifically. In fact, take a look at this little handy dandy graph here that shows you what happened with the entire Jeweled Lotus situation, where it fell off of a cliff.
So that chart in particular is what I want to address here because, well, it doesn't really look like any of the charts I've seen, although it does bear some similarity to the Commander Legends version of the card chart I have is from October 1st, so that explains some of what's happening after that major dip, although parts of that are what I'm going to explain in a moment. But if I'm going to be honest with you, it still only vaguely resembles the chart you're showing, and the interface is the same. These are both from TCG Player. It's possible the screenshot he's got was from earlier in the sell-off, and that's why it looks a little bit different, but I can't really put my finger on just how wonky this feels. I mean, you know, other than the fact that a lack of evidence of these things later, when we know that he can, and in fact intended to, show evidence on screen for something like this, but, you know, details, we'll talk about it.
So, straight out the gates, something like this makes a ton of people angry. You have players who are mad about it. You have Magic investors who are mad about it. Now, when it comes down to it, the investors are upset because they've lost profit potential. Well, when you're invested in stuff, that's a risk you take, right? The people I really feel bad for are the players who are like me, everyday people who aren't loaded and have to save up for big purchases. You have to understand that a jeweled Lotus could cost you $100, or if you're getting actually one of the super fancy versions, it could cost you hundreds and hundreds of dollars. Same kind of deal for Mana Crypt, Dockside Extortionist, not quite as high on the price scale, but still a very pricey card, right?
Okay, well, I understand how upsetting this can be for a lot of people who did buy the card at a higher price, only to see it lose value and not be playable. For one, I can actually indicate why the lows of the price didn't hold with a couple of things about this that catch my eye. So, for one way that Commander, and really any casual format, can differ from a competitive one is that people can have Rule Zero conversations where they agree to exceptions to the default rules due to being able to trust each other more than a random player you meet at a con. Sure, the deck that uses Jeweled Lotus as a major accelerant isn't something that you're running randomly at a con, but you can still play it if you get people to agree with it, and although admittedly that's harder to do with the label of the card being banned, it's really a sign that these cards require a greater level of trust to not abuse than others, which can easily be given when you don't know someone very well. So, part of the initial bounce back is the panic of Jeweled Lotus being unplayable everywhere, well, not actually being true, but instead being relegated to casual tables, and a massive plunge resulting from a panic correcting into a more reasonable price drop when the market stabilizes. And while we're on that, let's talk about spending hundreds of dollars on a premium version. Yeah, the value drop for those is way less, if not non-existent at this point in the case of Mana Crypts. And notably, it's the base version of these cards that see the most long-term movement. Almost like that's normal. But I think I'm getting away from the point here, and that's why the people spending hundreds aren't really SOL. If you're getting these premium versions, you're probably getting it to bling out the deck, right? Well, you still blinged out the deck. Sure, it's more expensive than it would have been if you would have waited, but that can apply the other way around too. Anyone who waited on a $30 JLo for it to drop more lost money by waiting. Still feel bad for them, don't get me wrong. Losing money tends to overall be a bad thing. But the amount I feel bad for someone buying a Neon Mana Crypt is a lot less than someone buying a Double Masters version. But now let's talk about Dockside Extortionist real quick. You said wasn't as high as the $100 price tag. And you're right, technically it was like 80 to 90 bucks, but I feel like that's kind of splitting hairs. But also wrong to even involve it in the conversation about people losing money on these cards, since its price last changed on TCG Player around 9/11, so there should be no buyer's remorse involved. Except the reason that's not true is the exact reason the TCG Player market graph cannot be trusted. Because it just flat out doesn't account for a large percentage of the sales that were happening, which it just lists as, well, basically non-existent. But if you look at the list of sales, you can see a lot of near mints selling after September 23rd for 40 to 50, and the ones before September 23rd selling for 70 to 90, but at a lower volume, which is, probably a sign that the price was overinflated in a way that discouraged sales to begin with, but that's beside the point. The other big difference with Dockside was that it was already being signposted as a card that was being deserved for if it began showing up more frequently at casual tables, with the very reason they didn't ban it back during older updates being cited in the article announcing the banning of Dockside Extortionist, which is probably part of what was controlling the price of the card in the first place. That, though, does highlight something that the RC did wrong on this, that they would admit to pretty much the day your video came out. The issue is less that they banned them at all, but rather the general public didn't really know that these cards were being watched. I mean, technically, there still was an issue with them being banned in the first place, but I'll get into that later.
So you have a situation where some people saved up for months to get one of these cards, only to have the rug pulled out from under them. That's a lot of money to spend on a card. We're talking about the value of AAA games if you want to go and buy a video game, something along those lines. Now, obviously, when it comes down to it, they're game pieces anything can get banned, so this can happen. But this hit multiple cards at the same time. It hit a bunch of people who aren't straight up investor class, and they got hosed with toys they wanted to play with that they can't even use.
See, the thing about a ban list, right? It defines the rules for tournament Magic, but doesn't prevent you from using the cards however the hell you want otherwise. You know, because they're toys at the end of the day. We are talking about a game piece that's a physical commodity. Like, if we really want to go in the direction of a video game example, we can do that. Let's talk about Mii Fighters in Smash Bros. According to the MSEL official rules for Smash Ultimate, Mii Fighters must use a default costume, be a guest Mii, and have which attacks they selected specifically denoted. What this essentially means is that your custom Mii that lets you play as Sans in Smash, not allowed. You'll have to stick to being a Nest main. Condolences. But that doesn't mean that you can't use your Sans Mii against your friend's Nest because you think that the game theory meme is somehow still fucking funny. You still have the toy, but there are contexts by which you're not allowed to use it. These types of rulings actually get applied to cosmetics in games all the time, be it CSGO, League of Legends, even fucking Fortnite does this. And I know people meme about Magic the Gathering becoming Fortnite, but like, that's a positive thing that Fortnite does. The fact that you think calling it a toy and pretending that the only context for it to be used requires following the ban list rules fit in the same thought show how little understanding you have. But I can take this one step further. Ways to use JLo outside of normal EDH. For one, the way I've been using it to make a Jenny of the Block joke. But other than that, you can use it to represent a treasure token. A very blinged out treasure token, don't get me wrong. But even in a competitive play, you're allowed to use whatever you want as a token, as long as it's not misleading. That's why I recommended a treasure token specifically, since it sacrifices to make mana, and like a treasure token would do, and it's very clearly a card that wouldn't be legal in the format unless it's Legacy or Vintage. And as you pointed out, it's basically unplayable in Legacy or Vintage, although using it as a 0 mana artifact in a deck that cares about getting out free artifacts is another way to use it, albeit a highly suboptimal one. There's also Cube. You can make a cube specifically for Commander even, and you're the one designing the cube, so you don't have to give a fuck what the ban list has to say when doing so. There's also the fact that it exists as a reference to an even more broken card, Black Lotus, that you may not want to drop money on, but still want to play higher powered Vintage with your friends. Well, just ask them if you can use JLo as a proxy for Black Lotus. Even at its highest price, it's way less expensive. Although, real talk, if you're playing with your friends and using proxies, you're probably not actually buying a JLo to begin with anyway, but you still get my point. It's still something that can be used outside of its intended use, much like how you can use as a Lego set as caltrops if you really want to be that sadistic. Well, actually, that one's probably against the law, but you could totally, like, build a house or some shit with a Millennium Falcon side if you wanted. That's legal.
And there are some people who still have Jeweled Lotuses on the way to them in the mail, along with the other cards as well. But for me, Jeweled Lotus is the real poster boy of the conversation because it is the one that has been absolutely obsoleted.
We will get into this later, but that's not something that changes with what you're talking about. You're right about it hitting multiple cards that were of high dollar value, and a ban hitting pocketbooks in such an extreme way has far less precedent in Magic. Let's just say Yu-Gi-Oh! Is no stranger to high dollar value bans and doesn't get this butthurt about it. But as you said, these things can happen, and the real difference here is that more cards were hit at once than usual for really any Magic format. It was a format that doesn't see anything in terms of ban list changes very often, and the cards are more expensive than they usually would be.
Watch this. Fuck!
So, the Commander format is a weird beast. Most Magic formats are governed by Wizards of the Coast, so any player can be forgiven for thinking, wait, so Wizards in charge of Standard, and Modern, and Pioneer, and Vintage, and Legacy, but Commander is just some other organization that doesn't really have to answer to them, and Wizards doesn't make the decisions? What?
Yep. I mean, that's not that surprising, since Wizards also didn't make Commander, but did make every format you listed. Weird how the only ones that are under direct Wizards controls that you didn't mention were ones also created by the community. But anyway, it's not like Wizards has had absolute control over MTG's other formats either, because they're are independently run events, including the SCG Tour, which I've played in. Well, okay, I top 8'd in IQ. Money has tended to be a limiting factor in how far it can get in high-level tournament play. Channel Fireball holds independent tournaments as well. And there have been plenty of community-built and community-maintained formats, some of which challenge the very idea of what Magic is as a game, like Judge's Tower, Party Box, or Dan Dan, and others just use limitations on deck building that are different from others, like Pre-Modern and Canadian Highlander. Hell, you could even make your own format if you really wanted to. We're going to cover more about Commander having been an independent format later, but this take is just so head-ass. Even Yu-Gi-Oh! Has Edison format, and the DBZ CCG has been community releasing entire sets for a couple of decades now.
Let's be very real. Wizards is absolutely involved in these banning decisions because we found out that the rule committee had been in discussion with Wizards of the Coast for like about a year talking about doing these bannings. And that's part of what has led to the bad feelings that some people have over this situation, because Wizards has been clued into the fact that, hey, wait a minute, the rules committee is actually looking at hitting these big label cards. And on top of that, you have the fact that the rules committee has been known for being very reticent, very hesitant to do any meaningful bans. We hadn't heard a peep from them in a while. The most recent thing was them talking about figuring out how are we going to get silver bordered cards into a more feasible scenario so we can put them in different tiers for people to use.
Yeah, we already knew that the RC was in communication with Wizards, including the fact that a WotC employee was actually on the RC. They knew it was being looked at even if they didn't know the ban itself was going to happen. They were involved in the decision-making process, although it's still true that they were not the ones with the final say in this regard. And this, by the way, is the part where the threats come back, because I'm not sure if Mike realizes it, but he's about to signal boost the exact reasons these threats started happening. At least in my opinion, these are the exact reasons they started happening. And what he's signal boosting are false allegations that were incredibly dubious even at the time.
So nobody, aside from insiders in the know, had any clue that this ban was coming. But Wizards of the Coast knew, obviously the rules committee knew, and there are particular retailers and other individuals in the Magic community who do have inside information. So some game stores delisted all these cards from their buy list. We're looking at like weeks in advance, right?
So now we get to one major problem I have with Magic Historian, and that's when he says these kinds of things, and literally not once has he ever shown actual evidence of what he's claiming. Just spews out things as fact that are actually huge deals that don't have any evidence. Again, willing to show a graph on screen, but not evidence of cards being delisted from buy list. But first, let's operate under the assumption that this is something actually happening. Could there be other reasons that shops are not buying JLOs? Well, yeah, and one of those you're going to point out later, but another reason could very well be that the store has plenty of inventory that isn't moving of the card in question, which could be a sign of overinflation of prices. And since you didn't provide any info, they could be delisting lower qualities of the card and only taking near mint copies due to issues moving those with more damage. They may have known the cards were being considered, but still not known a ban was going to happen, so delisted temporarily in expectation of potential market volatility in relation to the announcement calling the card out as one to look out for being banned in the future, which would have also had the potential to drop the price. They could have run into a lot of counterfeiting issues with this card, and thus need to temporarily delist the card to deal with what they'd received and improve their verification processes. So many other reasons that a delisting could have happened other than knowing that the ban would happen, let alone a week earlier than what the quarterly update was scheduled to happen at. But that's just proof that there's doubt for the delisting being that reason. Whereas in reality, the better thing to do is to disprove the delisting existing entirely, which, well, that becomes a lot more of a challenge when you don't drop names, don't provide evidence of the claim for me to verify, don't do anything other than just say that a thing happened vaguely. I'm basically being asked to prove a negative and doing that. What I can do, though, is provide a thread with logs of buy list status changes for the whole year from Star City Games GM Ben Blywes, I definitely butchered that name, who cites a rumor spreading with almost the exact same wording. And while this proof is from after your video came out, it's the only thing that references the rumor's existence. I mean, other than a Reddit thread as well that reports supposed proof of insider trading, which you may notice the original post being moderator removed, and the reason being cited as posting of unsubstantiated claims of insider trading. And this was basically the only thing to come up when I tried to look into proof of the insider trading allegations or what the evidence is. Now, I know what you're thinking. I can't really prove that Mike's treating this as fact. He may very well be reporting on the rumor to contextualize people's anger. Well, for one, I can. He literally says that people were doing this, and not the rumors that it's happening. And for two...
So inside information is flowing around, and that causes an extra level of consternation.
You were saying? The only way this could be more clearly an insider trading accusation is if he called it insider trading specifically. And what about that consternation, Mike? Let's talk about the results of that again. See, when we start reaching criminal levels of harassment with this kind of stuff, it's much more likely to happen and happen with more people in a more credible way when the motivation tends to involve someone feeling wronged in some way, either by way of immoral or criminal activity they believe someone is getting away with, losing money, stuff like that. You know, the kinds of things that normally motivate crimes. And look, I don't want to tone police anyone here, but harassment isn't an appropriate response no matter how wronged you have been, whether the wrongs inflicted upon you were legitimate or not. Because turnabout is just plain not fair play when it comes to this kind of thing, and just leads to a spiral of continued escalation. So, by signal boosting this insider trading rumor and presenting it as fact, you wind up unintentionally turning what would be a fringe and less credible level of outrage into something dangerous enough to cause people to feel unsafe enough to run to the corporation that nobody fucking wants running the thing, including the corporation themselves, but I'll get to that later. I think the unintentional part of that is important, because in my original script for this video, I cite the dangerous aspects of this mindset that Magic Historian fosters and, to put it bluntly, exploits, and state that I believed it to be unintentional. Well, for one, at this point, I've seen so much of it that I don't think the exploitation part of that mindset is unintentional, especially when looking at the double standard for when he presents information based on whether it benefits that exploitation or delves into the dangerous aspect of it. But I still do believe that it becoming dangerous is something that Mike doesn't intend, but am willing to say that I feel like, based on, everything, it's something that is fed into by what he does recklessly.
Now, on one hand, I actually very much like that the Rules Committee is pushing back against Wizards of the Coast in one way. They're only half pushing back. So by pushing back, I mean, for the longest time, it feels like the Rules Committee wouldn't do anything that caused any problems for Wizards of the Coast at all.
I would say that this will bite you in the ass later, but I may as well clamp on the cheeks right now. You're right, they did push back against Wizards. Josh Lee Kwai, formerly of the Commander Advisory Group and one of the first to leave as a result of all this, stated on the Command Zone podcast about Wizards taking over the format that Wizards advised against these bans taking place. Not sure if they would have wanted only some of the bans, but basically the decision as it stands was something they advised against doing. So, what did you have to say when you reported on that?
A very high prominent member of it was from the Command Zone. His name's Josh, right? A lot of you, I'm sure, are very aware of who he is. So he basically resigned from the keg after this entire fallout, after the banning, but before Wizards of the Coast had actually taken over the format. And he basically offered some enlightenment as to what was going on in the form of Wizards of the Coast apparently said to the Rules Committee, do not ban Jeweled Lotus, do not ban Mana Crypt. Now, there's a couple of different ways to view this. If you want to be kind and take the best possible outcome, you can go, all right, Wizards of the Coast told them that because they knew there would be huge blowback and that this would cause them to get flooded with people hating on them, right? And on the negative side of things, you can say Wizards of the Coast said that because those two are massive, juicy reprints that they have been milking for years and years and years.
So, you admit that them not wanting the bans to happen can easily be in the better interest of safety. I can cite reasons why Wizards would disagree with this ban other than the cards being moneymakers if you want, namely relevant in what you leave out of what Josh said.
I don't know if they said, hey, just do Nadu and Dockside or what, but they were like, this full decision, please don't do this.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that they cared about the totality of the ban and not necessarily two specific cards that were part of it. That could even mean that they wanted to make more money off of Nadu if you want to be cynical about it. But another important thing is part of the context of what Josh says. It indicates a reason beyond monetary gain that Wizards would be against the full scope of the banning. It's relevant to the threats that RC member Olivia Gobert Hicks was receiving. See, as a response to the threats, Jim LePage, someone who joined the Commander Rules Committee at the same time as her, would be allowed to break from protocol and reveal that Olivia voted against the ban in its state, and specifically only wanted Nadu and Dockside to be banned, with Mana Crypt and JLo explored when the format could stabilize around those two. Considering how rarely Wizards bans more than 2 cards at a time in formats where you're using less cards and more copies of them, this would seem to be in line with the way that Wizards would handle a ban of a similar nature to this one. Almost like they do it that way, because banning a ton of cards at once tends to be how you get the most pushback, because that's more people playing those cards to get affected, or someone's deck needing to change more because of how many of those cards they are playing. So, yeah, it's almost like not wanting the ban to go through this way actually has evidence of lining up with not wanting as severe a backlash against the RC. But there's something else from this in particular that I want to address that I previously indicated that I'd get to later.
Now, if you want my opinion, I very much believe the second category, right? Wizards of the Coast isn't actually that interested in protecting the rules committee as far as I'm concerned. I firmly believe for the longest time Wizards was waiting for the right moment to take control of the Commander format away from the rules committee. Because if you think about it, and I've literally had people ask me this question, they're like, okay, Hasbro shareholders want to know, and this is from people talking to Hasbro shareholders, they want to know why Commander is Magic's biggest format, right? Sure is. So why is an organization outside of Magic the Gathering in charge of their biggest format? And obviously, that is an excellent question. That's going to be pretty difficult to answer to shareholders in a satisfactory manner, right?
Actually, it's not difficult to answer at all, and is probably part of the reason why Hasbro didn't make Wizards take over the format's management already. Why would it make any financial sense to take over the costs of maintaining the primary format for non-competitive play when you have community volunteers doing it for you for free? Why have all of Commander under your umbrella when the format became the most popular thing because of the grassroots marketing that a community-run format creates? There's a cost associated with having a rules enforcement wing, and that wing would need to expand to cover Commander, even more so when you're not able to collect as much formalized data about the format due to lack of sanctioned competitive play. It would also need to expand the PR and community outreach wing, because you no longer have those volunteers you're in communication with doing the community outreach for you. It costs money to run the format, and it was an expense Wizards didn't need to make for their most popular format, and an expense big enough that even if you believe it would open them up to be able to squeeze more blood from that stone, it would be a poor business decision unless people's irrational and unhinged behavior makes secure protection for the individuals making these decisions necessary, which, by the way, is also a cost incurred by the corporation that needs to enact those security measures. But I should probably get back to the video I was originally covering, as important as those 2 points are to showing the massive double standard and shifting of goalposts that happens when the baseless rumor that you spout initially gets proven to not hold any fucking weight.
Right? So you have a scenario where they put out the recent unset and said, hey, Commander Committee, wouldn't it be fun if uncards were legal in Commander for a month? And we want to print up advertisements that go in the packs and stuff like that to tell people you can play these cards in Commander. And the Commander Committee went along with it 100%, which, as far as I'm concerned, was a terrible decision to make.
I guess to some degree it would be terrible if they allowed cards that wouldn't have been legal in Commander to be default legal in Commander on a temporary basis. Sure. Shame that's really close to being a flat-out bold-faced lie to the point where I can only say it's not one, because something like this technically did happen at one point. See, when you say the recent unset, I'm thinking Unfinity from 2022, but when I look up anything about that, I'm finding that they treat the acorn symbol that denotes a card as not legal for Eternal formats the same as silver bordered. You can discuss with your playgroup, but it's by default banned, which is kind of what the ban list is supposed to be in the first place that people miss. The by default of Commander, but with a format that's intended to be casual-centric, that default is subject to change based on what people you're playing are comfortable with, or would rather play without. But more importantly, Unfinity also introduced a lot of cards that would be Commander legal regardless, and I found the September 2022 preview article they did pointing out that the non-Acorn cards, including attractions and many sticker cards mind you, were perfectly legal. I have seen my share of clown cards and not batted an eye. But what you're actually referring to is from November of 2017, where they temporarily made uncards legal in Commander until the next quarterly update, which was a month later, which you take as being under the assumption it was done because Wizards asked them to do it. And the evidence I could find of this was literally a forum post linking to another forum post on a website that no longer exists. As for the ad card talking about playing the cards of Commander, I can find no proof of that, almost like it was 7 fucking years ago, and no one actually cares. Like, I think that's the thing that bothers me. No evidence they were pressured to do this, even when it was already intended as a casual format, and already had efforts being made to present the uncards as legal for casual Magic for years before this, and you talk about like it's recent when there's been at least one unset since then, way more recent than this, and they did not make those cards temporarily legal, meaning that this sort of decision making did not stick. And you'd think it would be the primary goal was bowing to WotC's monetary whims, that they would just do it again. How much confusion this statement alone creates highlights another major issues with Mike's content that honestly I wasn't going to bring up in the original version of the video, but with it being this egregious, I'm sure as shit going to do it now, and that's the rambling. Like, this is military grade rambling. I can't even address the original topic of discussion very well because of the fact that I'm having to deal with 5 other head-ass things you say in the midst of it. You are a certified yapper to the point where I question... Actually, no, I'm going to save that, because it ties into what I'm going to say near the end of the video. I struggle to even call it final thoughts, honestly.
Because at the end of the day, the whole point of having a Commander Committee is so that you can have a codified set of rules. Yes, Commander does have Rule Zero, where you're supposed to sit down with people ahead of time and talk about what's acceptable. But as far as I'm concerned, when it comes to playing games, you need to have a rule set that everybody can go and point at and go, these are the rules that we're playing by.
So you acknowledge the default method of play being not the only way to play, then? Yes, having the default rule set is important, but you do acknowledge that you should have a Rule Zero conversation. It's a shame you don't stand by the Rule Zero conversation actually being part of a casual format.
On the surface, they like to present it as it's a community thing and everybody talks happily at the beginning of the game, and people are like, my deck is a power level 4. And by that I mean, I have 4 different 2-card combos that let me win on turn 3. And other people are like, your deck is a 9, Billy? I'm sick of your crap! right? So rule 0 is not something that actually works really well. It's based off the real concept of a group of friends who have been playing cards together for years and years and years and have yelled at each other enough that they don't play the things. You can't play mass land destruction all the time.
So either it's part of it or it's not, and whether or not it's even a thing that's involved seems to shift for you based on how convenient it is to how bad it makes Wizards sound. Both having codified default rules and the ability for people to bend those rules with their playgroup based on conversations they have with the playgroup can both be true. You know, these things aren't mutually exclusive, and the fact that you think these conversations inherently involve your playgroup yelling at each other about this kind of shit shows that you don't actually have friends that you can play Magic with, because a lot fewer of these conversations require yelling than you seem to think.
Especially if you're somebody who's going to go down to game stores and play with strangers and all this sort of thing, which is something that Wizards has been encouraging more and more with the way that they've overall changed the design of everything related to Magic. Basically, Commander has become the centerpiece of Magic the Gathering. And so Magic's premier, biggest format, its most important format, and that's undeniable at this point. I mean, if you look at everything they do, every set they make has Commander decks.
He's about to go off on something else I have to address, so first I need to talk about the shift into more being printed for Commander, which is absolutely correct, but I think I can answer that with a question. Is Wizards making Commander more important, or is Wizards acknowledging what the majority of the player base is doing? While I started playing EDH in 2011, I was actually very interested in the format before then, but thought the price of certain staple cards wasn't very accessible. Until, of course, I was able to buy one of those first Commander precons, had a Soul Ring, had a Commander in colors I was interested in, and built with the cards included as well as an archetype from when I first started playing Magic that I thought would be fun to use, which I've since refined into something a little bit different. The shitty Cardor deck that I mentioned in one of my previous videos, it's mostly shitty because of how long it's been since I updated it and relying on a fringe strategy in order to function. And see, that's the thing. I can tell you firsthand that the interest in EDH by the more casual markets far predated Wizards even printing cards for the format, and it was already one of many multiplayer formats that people were playing, although really the only one that you needed to make a deck specifically for. It's also far from the first attempt Wizards made in making something for casual, and even multiplayer casual, given Planechase, Archenemy, and even Vanguard from all the way back in the Weatherlight saga, which you could argue was Wizards' original attempt at making EDH a format they owned and printed cards for, because that's basically what Vanguard is. And this was made a year after EDH was printed in The Duelist, the official Magic the Gathering magazine at the time. I'll delve more into this later, but yeah, maybe printing cards designed to work in Commander is more natural step than you think it is. But I don't know, maybe you'd have to be some kind of historian of Magic to figure that one out?
Check it out. We're making Modern Horizons 3. It comes with incredibly expensive Commander decks. Not modern decks, because we were told, we can't make you modern decks because you won't pay how much they cost, which is an insane thing to say to us. But that's a conversation for a different time. I don't want to get sidetracked here.
Way too fucking late for that. You've been going on so many sidetracks that your railway looks like a fucking bush. I'd say a tree, but that implies you ever go straight forward to the destination. But okay, roasting aside, let's talk about that. This is likely related to Mark Rosewater's comments about how the price point and power level don't line up very well, and while that sounds similar to what you're talking about, it's distinctively different, and I'm pretty sure the historical evidence of past precons can show exactly what that really means. So, for one, pre-constructed decks just have always been a lower power level than what someone builds themselves, and this is in part by design because it encourages upgrading, and unlike Cardfight Vanguards, they actually put the cards that you want to upgrade in the fucking booster pack, so I don't have to buy 4 decks to finish my Link Joker build. The issue with this is that a modern precon that doesn't have a reason to appeal to existing modern players, as well as new ones, is going to be met with poor sales. And I don't say that simply in theory, because it actually happened in 2014 when they made a modern event deck that most people didn't buy, which at the time was $75 but was selling on the secondary market for $50 and still struggling to make numbers even then. And that deck had at least one commander chase card in the form of Sword of Feast and Famine, which really had no business being in a black-white tokens deck. And the modern event deck isn't the only non-commander precon that this has been an issue with. Look at the starter decks not selling. Look at planeswalker decks not selling. Look at dual decks not selling. Look at premium decks not selling. Almost every product that has not had enough for the existing player base has failed. But let's look at the other half of that argument. It costs Wizards the same amount no matter what cards they choose to print. So they could choose to put chase cards into a precon, and while they do this a little bit, there's a good reason why they wouldn't, and that's because of the secondary market in itself and what they do when this happens. There has historically been an upswing in the price of precon itself when it's shown to have components that are of a higher value than average, be it because of Scavenging Ooze and Counterpunch in 2011 or True Name Nemesis and Mindseas in 2013, causing the whole deck to spike astronomically, which makes the decks less accessible for the people who would benefit the most from the product as it was intended to be sold. While Commander can have lower power decks that still appeal to the more higher power market, Modern has pretty much always been promoted as a competitive format first and foremost. And even if that isn't 100% true in a historical sense, it sure as shit is now. So an entry-level product just isn't going to sell as well as printing the singles another way. And there's also the concept of needing to maintain reprint equity, but that's either a conversation for a video on its own or later on in this video when it may be more directly relevant. And bear in mind, I actually do kind of agree with you. They should have modern decks with this over commander decks. Or, at the very least, this is an interesting concept, possibly use this as a means to introduce the concept of a modern commander format and made all the cards they put in the decks modern legal, possibly with efforts to have the decks emulate some kind of modern strategy. But I both understand the reason the decision was made as it was and have a hard time bitching and moaning about it as hard as you are, especially as someone whose interest in Commander hasn't really dipped as much like it has with Modern, primarily because of the price point to play by comparison.
So, Commander is the absolute premier format. Everybody is ushered into it. Wizards of the Coast changed things around to the point where if you went to game stores, you couldn't even find starter decks to get into Magic with. If you wanted to start playing something like Standard, hit the bricks, ugly, buy a Commander deck, and shut your mouth.
So this is just a flat-out lie. Bloomburrow starter kits exist, and if your store isn't ordering them, that isn't on Wizards. The product is right there if the demand is there for it.
That was basically the philosophy, right? As Wizards embraced the whole casual vibe, they said, hey, you know what? Everybody's playing casual. Commander's the king of casual. That's all we need to focus on. And we're seeing that that was not a smart decision. It has caused damage to other formats big time. Modern accidentally got ruined by Commander. Nadu was supposed to be a card for Commander that they threw in the Modern set because they wanted to have cards that appealed to Commander. And Nadu broke Modern and already got banned in Commander, right?
But doesn't that point to Nadu being a problem in general and not a problem created because of the fact they designed it for Commander? I mean, other cards in Modern Horizons 3 were made for Commander too, but they didn't warp Commander or Modern for that matter. Like, I feel like we're going to talk more about this later, but part of the reason it wound up being changed at the last minute was because of the concerns about how its original ability interacted with Commander. And what got messed was the 0 mana abilities that target, which could have been a mistake to happen even if granting Flash was a concern for the Modern format. I will say, though, that I feel like making a card explicitly signposted for Commander and putting it in the main Modern set when you have the Commander decks right there is kind of dumb. But what you're doing is exaggerating the issue, especially with how you follow along with this train of thought.
So you have this diminishing return scenario where they focused it so much around Commander. When you go down to the game store, guess what? good luck finding Friday Night Magic. Good luck finding people playing Modern. There are little pockets here and there of people actually playing those formats, but almost everything has fully shifted into Commander. The change has been essentially a global one, making Commander the forefront format, right?
And that's not necessarily on Wizards, nor is it necessarily because of them focusing on Commander. And in fact, could just as easily be the other way around. As I've been saying, supply and demand, Commander doesn't become the biggest format without people wanting to play it. Hell, this is proven. Wizards tried to push other Commander variants over the years, Oathbreaker, Tiny Leaders, Vanguard, and even Brawl, which is the only one that even comes close to being successful, but even then, that's because it's the only one that's playable on Arena. But when push came to shove, nothing Wizards pushed had the kind of reach that a community-created format did, so it's no wonder they embraced it just like they did with Cube. I think you could make the argument that it takes both things happening, but I don't think it's reasonable to say that Wizards pushed other formats out and Commander in rather than the inherently casual format took over the market share for the primarily casual player base, because just like in fighting games, the casuals will always outnumber and in most cases outspend the competitive scene. I'm gonna skip over this long section where he just describes why J-Lo was banned, basically repeating the entire headline, and we're still on him describing why the RC's decision was pushed back against Wizards, but only partially, and he's kind of just repeating himself a lot. But there is one thing that I do want to mention overtly.
Wizards knew what they were doing when they created the Jeweled Lotus. They said, it's a Black Lotus. You can only use it to cast your Commander, though, so it's restricted. Except the Commander is something that you always have access to. So it's very, very, very easy to utilize Jeweled Lotus. Or it was. Obviously, can't use it at all now.
So as much as I want you to keep in mind the fact that everything is still Wizards bad with him, I can prove how putting a restriction is something that they have not only done before and not banned out of the formats that would be considered comparable in power level to Commander in terms of individual cards. So there's a card called Lion's Eye Diamond, which works the same as Black Lotus. Lets you use the mana however you want, but you have to discard your hand. This is banned in Oathbreaker, restricted in Vintage, and perfectly legal in every other format it would be legal. And it's not like people didn't build around that downside in Legacy with Dredge, and the current number 4 deck in the Legacy format, Doomsday. Both produce 3 mana of one color, both have a downside, and yet you seem to think that Wizards was pushing the power level when, in fact, this power level matches up with what they think is fine for an equivalent format they actually have control over. So right, about that skip screen.
Watch this. Fuck!
And then they turned around and said, hey, we're not actually going to ban Sol Ring because, it defies... I know we just said that super fast starts are a really big problem, but, it's just kind of part of ingrained into the whole game, and, it defies all the odds. It's...
Wow, you're right. That does seem shaky. Maybe it's because what you said isn't what they said. Well, okay, the defining format part was, and it was stupid too, but defying the odds is pretty fucking different from defying the laws of physics. One is saying that something is improbable becomes probable, and the other is saying that something impossible becomes possible. And the difference between something not being likely and not being possible is literally infinite, because even if the probability of the improbable event is 1 in a fucking Googleplex, then the difference between it and 0 is still infinite. And that part about them going, we know we said fast starts are bad, that you put at the beginning is actually the real problem, because in reality, what they said about Sol Ring is still stupid. They didn't even give the fast starts are bad as an absolute, though. Be it in the paragraph before talking about specific cards where they say occasional games like that are fine, but it shouldn't be common, and we're taking steps to bring that frequency down a bit by banning 3 of the most explosive plays in the format, or the ending of that expands upon this thought when talking specifically about Sol Ring, where they say this. We aren't trying to eliminate all explosive starts. It happening every once in a while is exciting, and removing the other 3 cards geometrically reduces the number of hands capable of substantial above-curve mana generation in the first few turns. So it's not that they don't think that it should exist, but rather that it shouldn't be commonplace, and just did a bad job of pointing out why Sol Ring was far enough below the power level of the other 3 cards to not be banned, even though the explanation is pretty fucking simple at the end of the day. Costing 1 mana substantially changes how quickly you go deeper into the game, and Dockside exponentially scales if played later, so it costing 2 isn't a restriction at all. Which is why the next part...
And what it really feels like, honestly, is this year-long discussion they had with Wizards, is Wizards was willing to accept the other bans they were doing, but they were like, you can't ban Sol Ring.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, especially with how you're painting Wizards as cash grabbing and taking advantage of a ban that they knew was coming by getting people to buy product that was just gonna get banned. Why would that change for Commander decks being playable out of the box? If you think about it, if you outmode every single prior pre-con so that the stuff you print after the bans were the only ones that were playable out of the box, doesn't making the old decks obsolete by way of ban list instead of by power creep save you some money at the cost of changing a single card in some things you already designed and possibly even just replacing it with a fixed version of Sol Ring that makes only 1 mana, or even Lotus Petal, which is a piece of reprint equity that you're not really getting much out of? And that's the thing about this conspiratorial talk that's going on. As soon as you actually think through the logic that's being ascribed to the situation, the less sense it makes. No, Wizards wouldn't tell the RC to not ban Sol Ring if they're fine milking people for Mana Crypt and JLo, because if they're willing to scam whales in the way that you're describing, they're willing to scam a lot more people in a way that at the end of the day is a lot less severe for the vast majority of them, but makes Wizards a lot more money in aggregate. So it doesn't even make sense that they would take a hardline stance against Sol Ring being banned while making sure they could rip people off with chase cards that, real talk, it takes more than one of in order to sell a set, especially since you're going to see the thing maybe once every other case at least. Not every other box, by the way. Every other case.
I did a video a few years ago saying that Wizards of the Coast is going to take control of Commander away from the Commander's Rules Committee. It will happen at a certain point. Right now, Wizards basically benefits from the fact that the Commander Rules Committee takes all the heat for the decisions that they make. They also essentially work for free because they're not Wizards of the Coast employees being paid to run Commander, right? So they do it because they want to. You have this scenario now where it looks like they're an independent body, but Wizards of the Coast obviously has a ton of control over them. Like I said, they got them to make uncards legal for a month, regardless of how many fights that would create for people.
See what I mean about how when you think about it, it doesn't make sense? Earlier, you said that it's difficult to answer the question of why Wizards doesn't run Commander, but you just gave the exact reason why they wouldn't want to that I already gave. And that's strengthened by your other theory about the amount of control Wizards exerts on the format. So with the explanation really being that simple, even if shareholders don't intuitively know the answer, why is it difficult to understand that answer? And for that matter, if these questions really are being asked by shareholders, why aren't they coming up in the publicly traded companies' shareholder meetings? Because those meetings are public knowledge too. They're required to be. You'd think someone would have asked if it was as prevalent of a question as you implied that it is.
So, Wizards of the Coast isn't going to stand for Sol Ring getting banned because it's literally in every single Commander deck that exists, right? So, if you go to your game store and you look at the huge wall of Commander decks, if the Rules Committee had banned Sol Ring, it would make every single deck on the shelf at the store illegal. And Wizards just isn't having it.
Which, again, doesn't follow with your logic. Once the decks are printed and shipped, they really don't give a shit if it's no longer legal by your own logic. And they also could have just asked the RC to create an exception for precons if they really had that much control. They did this with Stoneforge Mystic in Standard, Mike. There's no reason that they were shadow controlling the RC that they wouldn't do the same here.
I'm actually surprised that they didn't knee-jerk take the Commander Committee's power away just straight up after this. But Wizards clearly decided, hey, we can live with this. Overall, we're going to let you guys keep going. But at the end of the day, the Rules Committee is definitely paying attention to what Wizards wants. They're not truly independent.
See, now that's a lot more reasonable of a way of putting it than what you just said. You're right, they are listening to Wizards, but that's not the same thing as being controlled by them. But people, including you apparently, are stretching there being any connection at all to there being a massive fucking Shadow Cabal conspiracy.
Watch this. Fuck!
There are other people who said, I'm only going the proxy route from now on, where I'm just going to have cheap Chinese proxies printed up and use those.
Okay, before we get into his tangent, I gotta say, that might be a little bit racist. And from my understanding, the reason Chinese companies tend to be used for proxies isn't so much about cheap quality as it is an issue of copyright. But, hey, as a great man once said, some shit just cringeworthy. Ain't even gotta be deep, I guess.
And here's the crazy thing. The card quality of the proxies that are being made exceed the quality of genuine Magic cards. And if you only paid 50 cents a quarter or whatever to have it printed, guess what? You're not going to lose hundreds of dollars just from the company going, boom, Wizards made toys that are too shiny.
Okay, so Mike brings up card quality a lot, and I mean a lot, and I'll be honest, if he's experiencing an issue with it and I'm not, whatever, he can complain about it and I can just say that I don't see it and move on. But in his case, does this need to be part of this conversation? Far be it for me to talk about a diatribe tangentially related to the topic, but is the physical quality of the cards really what you're talking about? Don't get me wrong, if you're making your weekly video where you call insert most current set here a disaster, say the cards feel gritty all you want, that's fine, but shoehorning it into every conversation about Magic feels completely unnecessary. And familiar. Oh man, I can't wait for somebody to complain about it. I'm not explaining who I'm talking about. That'll be fun.
I mean, part of what's happened is, as it said in the banning announcement, Wizards keeps making more and more powerful commanders that have abilities that make it hard to get rid of them, things that let you draw cards to replace them, so crazy card advantage, and they're difficult to deal with.
I mean, I really have nothing about this. This is just true, and you've also explained why JLo in particular wasn't a problem before, but would be a problem now. Almost like the Commander Rules Committee already explained that. Thus explaining why JLo in particular would be a kind of explosive start they would want to happen less often.
And as we keep progressing forwards, Wizards keeps making more and more powerful cards because they have to, right? The only way to get you to change up your commander deck is to make even more powerful stuff.
Well, that's what they're doing, mostly. It's not necessarily true that they have to do it that way. One way, for example, is to have cards that aren't necessarily more powerful, but have more options of how they're used. This is kind of the cryptic command concept of cards being powerful. You get to choose to do two things, but if they printed a card that let you just do any two of those at the same mana cost, it wouldn't be nearly as good, because Cryptic Command is all about the flexibility and not just the power level of the individual effects. Double-faced cards have a similar concept. Balagad Recovery is actually strictly worse than most cards that do the same thing as it, as long as you ignore the fact that it can be a land drop if you don't need it for the recursion. Making things a little bit more expensive but giving multiple modes makes a card more flexible, which tends to make up for the cost and make it about equal in power level to what was already there, but is still considered an upgrade. There's a few other ways of doing this as well, but this is perhaps the most direct way of putting it that I can cite, some of which includes making cards that let your deck take a different direction, or even selling someone on a new commander deck, which in reality is where the power creep happening with a lot of the commanders themselves comes in, but it still doesn't have to.
This might sound crazy to people who haven't been around since the old days, but Commander used to be a place where you could play janky nonsense and have a good time. And now it's a straight up power haul race. Who can get the biggest, beefiest insanity out on like the third turn? Now that's not universal, but it is becoming more and more prevalent.
This is just all the more reason why banning the speed is the primary solution the RC could have taken, though. Especially since power creep is something that happens in every game, as much as people in Magic want to bitch that the power level of cards is more than it was 10 years ago. No shit, the overall power level of cards 10 years ago was more than it was 20 years ago, too. And while having a hard resource system like mana does quite a bit to mitigate that power creep, it can only do so much when, corporation or not, Wizards is still a company that would have a hard time continuing to print new product if people didn't buy it, which is something that gets ignored by most that want to talk about the power creep in MTG.
And the more Wizards pushes Commander as the main format, the more it warps all of the game's designs. Look at standard sets. Look at Thunder Junction. It had 50 different Commander options in it.
To be more precise about this, it was 43 in the main set, and 51 of you include what was in the Commander text, and geez, it's almost like it was advertised as being a set about legendary creatures a year before it came out. To put that into perspective, Dominaria, a set from 2018 that was considered the vast majority of the community to be a revitalization of the entire game, with Richard Garfield on the design team, also had a Legendary Matters theme and had 44 options for Commander in it. And yet, for some reason, this is a bad thing the second that you put a fucking cowboy hat on it, even though this is the same community that continually asked Mark Rosewater for a Wild West themed set. I guess until you get one. In addition, just because a creature can be your commander doesn't mean it should be your commander. It's worth noting some legendary creatures are better off in the 99 than actually in the command zone. For example, from Thunder Junction, Fortune Loyal Steed on EDH Rec shows 75 decks with Fortune as the commander, but 4,500 decks where the card appears at all. Almost like it's not that great as a commander, but still gets printed legendary for other reasons, like lore or the fact that it functions with other abilities in the set that care about legendary creatures. So, citing a number of things that can be your commander from a set, not the best metric for talking about commander ruining Magic.
Like I said, Modern Horizons got ruined by Commander.
You said that the card was printed for commander that was too powerful, and that there were commander decks. This is a good example of the rest of Magic being shaped by Commander, sure, but this is where you go from stating something factually to kind of just doomcasting with no real reason behind it. This is like complaining about replacing he or she on cards with they on a card because woke agenda when there are objective reasons for the change to have nothing to do with that. Oh man, I'm getting more direct with my comparisons, oh boy!
Watch this. Fuck!
So, this massive market crash has had a far-reaching impact with a number of different things going on. Obviously, we've got things like people quitting, the uptick in proxies. We have TCG Player coming out on the day of the ban. And if you don't know TCG Player somehow, it is pretty much the biggest site you can go to buy card singles. Well, they put up a policy saying, well, you can't cancel your orders for any of these Jeweled Lotuses, any of this stuff. You can't cancel your orders, none of that. You are stuck. We don't care about buyer's remorse. Did you just spend $300 buying yourself 3 Jeweled Lotuses? Well, congratulations. They're going to show up in the mail and you are on the hook for the payment. TCG Player is not losing their commissions on these sales, right?
You already wouldn't have been able to. The thing about the policy TCG Player update was the card getting banned was already not a valid reason for a return under their policies, but the update just spells that out. Likely because they saw a potential issue of people seeking refunds for that exact reason. And really, at the end of the day, think about it this way. If you go to your LGS and you buy an expensive card and then it gets banned the next day or later that day, do you expect them to give you a refund? No, that's stupid. Why are you asking TCG Player for it? When, in reality, TCG Player isn't even a fucking card shop. It's an aggregator.
On top of that, they've also said, if your address is wrong, we're not going to let you get a refund or whatever. That's on you. So anybody who tries to say, oh, it never arrived because of the wrong address, or like, too bad, you got to pay, bro.
The address part really can't be construed as being about the bans. It's likely related to people abusing that in order to get free cards. Also, fun fact, you do wind up with a window in order to fix an incorrectly entered address before the order is shipped. You know, Almost like you should be double checking the shipping address when you order anything online, because the error is almost always on you if the address is wrong. Thus why they tend to be multiple confirmation screens for this kind of thing in any online retailer's checkout. And that's the thing about all this, right? You take several things that are technically true and then spin them in a way to make them sound worse than they actually are, or even make them sound bad when they aren't even remotely so. Like, even getting back on the actual topic of the video, you can say that other people are talking about insider trading and attempts to rip off people and give yourself a pass, because it's not like you said these things yourself. You just reported on what Reddit was saying. But you're very selective about when you correct the Reddit rumor mill, and that selectiveness makes it clear that if you just report that people are saying this, you probably believe it yourself. Especially when you start actually saying it yourself.
Them talking about this for the last year with Wizards, here's what it smells like to me. It seems like what happened is they said, hey, we're looking at banning these cards. And Wizards like, whoa, hold on. We get that you want to ban the cards, but just wait a bit, buddy, because we've got people to skis, right?
Yeah, so this is just flat out confirmation of what I was just saying. You're not correcting the rumors because you believe them. Or at the very least, because it benefits your clicks to believe them, but I'll probably get into that probability later on. For now, I just need to prove how thin of ice your interpretation falls on.
Commander Masters and Ixalan, the newest one, both have these cards that have been banned in them. Jeweled Lotus, Mana Crypt, all of it. And interestingly enough, just through pure happenstance, right? This is totally random and wasn't planned. The recent mystery box that they sold, where you could get the mystery boosters, they came with collector boosters as a bonus. Now, what were those collector boosters? Oh yeah, that's right. Commander Masters and Ixalan. It's almost like Wizards dumped all of the product they knew would be dead, because it's only really big chase reprints that move the needle now when you're trying to sell stuff to Commander. Either insanely new broken stuff or crazy reprints are the only thing that get any attention. So you're buying these mystery boxes and going, woohoo! And then the booster packs show up. You crack a Jeweled Lotus. 2 days later, they go, oh, it's banned.
Wow, you're right. They did put collector's boosters for Commander Masters and Lost Caverns of Ixalan in the Festival in the Box. You know, that's a good argument, because you'd think if it was just all the booster sets from a given time frame of, let's say, half a year, there'd be other things in there. So you can imagine how giant of a hole it would poke in your argument if the Festival of the Box did come with, let's say, Wilds of Eldraine, which was between the two sets. Hey, guess what? You're fucked. Wow, go figure. It's almost like it actually was coincidental, and you're just grasping at straws that you get goddamn splinters and acting like there's gotta be a needle in there because of it. And yeah, dude, let's just pretend the other Neon Ink card from Lost Caverns of Ixalan, Cavern of Souls, doesn't exist. The only thing pushing the needle was Commander card, and not the card that's a staple in pretty much any deck that's even coincidentally focused on a particular creature type in literally every format, including Pioneer as of its LCI printing. Let's also pretend that modern staple that was already banned in Legacy Underworld Breach also wasn't in the set. Let's pretend that Bloodletter of Aclazotz is a Commander card. Let's pretend that all of these things you are far more likely to see in packs than Mana Crypt just don't exist. You have a better case with Commander Masters, at least, because there isn't a card that was ridiculously high value in there, but also less of one because there's more cards that were at the time, and still are in many cases, in fact, above average in price, like Fierce Guardianship, Deflecting Swat, Demonic Tutor, Avacyn, Craterhoof Behemoth, Smothering Tithe, the multiplayer duels, but remember, it's just Jenny from the block. So you're right, it does take high value chase cards to sell sets. But it also takes more than one, especially in the case of Mana Crypt and Lost Caverns of Ixalan, which functions as a lottery card with how rarely it shows up in these packs. When I was working on this video initially, I had an entire section of the video dedicated to ways that Magic Historian operates less like a passionate critic and more like a shameless content farm that calls as many things as possible bad because of how often negative press gets more views than positive press. But by being that overtly acerbic, it also comes with the risk of fueling the more toxic elements of your audience when you don't make an effort in your videos to temper that vitriolic reaction. And, no, having a goofy-ass smile on your face the whole time doesn't fucking count. But then, I was willing to say that this was unintentional at least, and that maybe having it being put to the forefront could give him enough sight of it to make a change in relation to it. In that degree, I'm very glad this video took as long as it did. I am so glad I had to restart the production almost entirely when I changed computers. Because let me tell you, if I got that video out when I actually wanted to finish it, that part of the video especially would have aged like milk. Yeah, needless to say, you provided plenty of evidence that this is recklessly indifferent to the consequences at best, and I could put a ton more into this video. I'm adding this sentence right now about how you talked about something in the contract for the Wizards Run Commander Committee and cited a very different example related to Disney, and spoiler warning, and still got everything about that situation wrong. That could be a whole commentary in and of itself. I could do a whole commentary on that. But I want this video to actually come out sometime this decade. I can't address every lie you tell to the point you're either dumb or doing it on purpose. And truthfully, I wouldn't think that someone with your history would be reckless about this sort of thing. I'm not going to go too far into that history except for, well, one notable piece of evidence that I found. Namely, when Magic Historian was kicked in the head on a live stream by some random bozo that didn't like being on camera in public. Yeah, figure that one out. Now, to be fair, this isn't really one-to-one, but really more of an indicator of how dangerous you should be aware that being a public personality can be. I mean, think about it. If some random guy that doesn't even know you will attack you for streaming in his vicinity, what do you think someone who actually doesn't like you is going to do? So, you'd think that you would know better than to fuel hatred for people in this regard. And yet here you are, doing it now. Well, yeah, okay, that's not the only reason I bring it up. See, this incident's reporting is admittedly a little bit hard to find, but, you know, I'm a digger. And not only did I find a Reddit post reporting on this happening, but that post linked to a YouTube video, and here's the way that video starts.
Well, it would appear that another Magic the Gathering YouTuber, MTG Purple, friend of the channel, also known as the Magic Historian, was just attacked, assaulted while live streaming.
Hey, does that guy look familiar to anybody else? Oh, right, that thing I kept alluding to! Right, so let me make something clear. In terms of this video, Jeremy did the right thing. It was absolutely correct to point out how awful that is, direct support Mike's way, and use his platform to help identify the perpetrator. But I think I want to note the choice of language. Friend of the channel. Mike even calls him a good friend in the comments, and like I said, Jeremy is totally being a good friend here in my eyes, but this was about 8 months after Jeremy was banned from Magic. So given the harassment that resulted in that ban, it's not a great look. But I'm not someone who operates on guilt by association. I'm very vocally against it, save for very specific types of associations someone can have that are much more poisonous. But see, when I see you repeating the same behaviors, that's when the association looks a lot more relevant. Except in Mike's case, there are ways that it's worse because it's being done less overtly. See, with Jeremy, I could see the things that he was trying to move past quickly to get to things that prove his point, but you, Mike, you just nebulously give a sentence of what people on Reddit are saying and ignore how many of those posts are getting pushback or have proof posted that goes against them in their very own comment thread. I have to do research to prove you wrong, while Jeremy will typically wind up putting the thing that proves him wrong on the screen and rely on his audience being too stupid to read. Well, what you rely on is your audience not doing research. Something a lot of audiences won't bother to do when they think the person on screen is giving them an honest, if condensed, version of the news. And Mike, Do you know why Jeremy was banned from Magic for Life? It was because of his comments towards Christine Sprankle, an MTG cosplayer that left the community due to harassment and cited him as the root cause of it. Now, a significant part of that was built on her quote-unquote crying for Patreon dollars and presenting an interpretation of her character that was holistically inaccurate. And while some overt direction for others to harass her were made, a lot of it was interpreting and presenting things in a vitriolic way. In fact, the professor made a video to highlight these things, which is part of what I'm responding to in my video, and I have this to say about it. He spends a lot of the video asking questions and pleading with you to think about if you may be unintentionally sending the level of hate being described towards other people. So, let me do the same thing with you, Mike. Do you think it's possible that you are unintentionally fueling the death threats that were sent to Olivia Gobert-Hicks? Do you think it's possible that your interpretations of what's going on are more harmful than providing constructive criticism on what you don't like would be? Do you think that maybe there's a better way to get across the message you want to get across without sounding hateful about it? 4 days before I got to the point of this script, the Command Zone released a sit-down between Josh Lee Kwai and the Professor, where they speak on creative responsibility. The catalyst for which was Josh feeling like he was responding to Wizards taking over the rules committee out of anger in the podcast episode on the subject that I even played a clip from earlier, and wanted to hold himself accountable for not handling that podcast as well as he should have. Being real with you here, I fucking love this video so much, and I feel like damn near anyone could learn a lot from it. So I'm just gonna pause my little dramatic spiel and tell you all to go watch it, even if you don't know Magic. I think you'll learn things about integrity and community responsibility as a content creator. Even I did, and I've been doing this for fucking years. But I want to play a clip of something the Professor says in the section titled Clickbait versus Commentary.
If we were just chasing drama and nothing else and clicks and nothing else, there's a million parts of my channel I wouldn't be doing, but they're not profitable. They're not part of that train. It would all just be Tolarian wins, me shaking my finger at Watsy, right? Those are the biggest viewed ones. They beat out shuffle ups. You know how sad my team of editors feels when I come in and I'm like, hey, you know that video that was me talking to the camera for 15 minutes that I edited because of the latest thing I'm frustrated with Watsy over? It's outperforming the latest shuffle up, you know, and they all just look like this, but it's because of all the work and effort that goes into that. But it's like, I don't want to only do those. I only do those when I have something to say. I could do those 3 times a week.
Mike, that's you. You're the person the Professor is saying he doesn't want to be, chasing profits at the expense of enjoyment. It is even your upload schedule. So with that in mind, just one more question. Which one do you think you are? Commentary or clickbait?
This will be my second video covering the Drake-Kendrick feud of 2024. I wasn't going to, since I released the first one right as it effectively ended, right after Kendrick delivered the song Not Like Us, which we can now definitively call the kill shot.
Boon, I swear to fuck, you did not just rope us to that stupid secretly covering a second video thing you do.
Okay, for one, I haven't done that nearly enough for it to be a trope to make fun of.
You've done it once, that's enough.
For two, I'm not, but this is important context. He's covered the whole beef, somehow doing so in 20 minutes, but, well, he was paying attention. I mean, not very well, spoiler warning, that's one of the big issues with this whole thing, but he's at least aware of the full context. Joe Jackson!
One thing we have learned in the past 2 months is that finishing moves can last quite a while. It was obvious within a few days of release that Not Like Us was going to stick around, but I thought Kendrick was just going to take the W. Instead, I am making this video in the wake of Kendrick dropping a fucking music video for Not Like Us, which is, again, a song he released 2 fucking months ago as part of a feud that he definitively won 2 fucking months ago.
Homie, you ought to know how the industry works by now. Sure, it's a diss track, but it's still a track, and releasing the visual medium for it tends to be part of the process.
Yeah, releasing a music video for something that's even more successful than anticipated as well is pretty normal. I mean, Old Town Road exists. it didn't have a music video before it blew up the entire internet and got a big budget music video months after its initial success to prolong its space in the pop culture zeitgeist. There's plenty of precedents for doing this.
Even if we ignore the artistic reasons, the music video is part of the presentation of the song itself. It serves as the last piece of what Drake was doing in the beef that Kendrick needed to respond to. Or did you forget that Drake diss track before Not Like Us and Meet the Grams that also had a larger scale music video? Which was the one thing that Kendrick didn't do before now.
At some point during this, Kendrick declared himself the biggest hater, but I don't know that I understood what that meant until right now. He's gonna win a Grammy for calling Drake a sex predator. He's gonna adapt Not Like Us into a graphic novel, and then he'll adapt that graphic novel into an HBO series, and then he'll adapt that series into a Broadway musical. He's going to win an EGOT for Not Like Us, which is fine with me. I've thought about basically nothing else since it happened, and I wanted the excuse to discuss it further. So, thanks Kendrick for dropping a video and rocketing the song back up to #1.
Yeah, sure, let's act like it's incredibly audacious for Kendrick to release a music video, then literally point out the pervasiveness of the song as a reason why the music video would be super fucking relevant. And I get exaggerating something or stuff like that for the sake of adding entertainment value to what would normally be a pretty bland review, but actually the more I think about that kind of paints what you're doing here as kind of just fine. A little cringy, sure, but and the padding, the runtime, that's kind of cringe. But then again, I'm kind of doing that right now by acknowledging it. I mean, it's not the way I would do it, sure, but
hold that thought.
The fact that there's a music video should not be surprising. It's a big hit song. It should get a music video, if for no other reason than to make it easier for YouTubers to make videos about it. Ahem. But it was still surprising to me for two reasons. One, despite the party vibes coming off of it, this is still a really mean, ugly song and one of the ugliest feuds we've ever seen. And two, Kendrick, for the most part, was a ghost during this entire battle.
Oh. Well, in that case, that kind of changes the vibe entirely, doesn't it?
Yeah, I kind of figured it would.
Yeah, so you're about to elaborate on that last part, and I think I want to use your own analogy on you there, and that first part I'm going to let slide because other than specifically calling out Beyonce, I probably would have made a similar joke. Let's talk about the mean-spirited means no music video. Yeah, bullshit. The Thunder Rolls has a music video, and that's a song about murdering a cheating husband.
I'm sorry, what?
Oh, yeah, and the music video is about the man abusing her to make it self-defense instead of murder. But, that was only in 1990.
Is that why you hate country music?
No, I hate country music because most of it doesn't have the balls to be that daring and expressive.
Hey, yo, not to be the type of guy who gets shit back on track, but, right, sorry. I mean, if Toddy Smalls want to talk about diss tracks, I can be Fire Belly for a sec. Literally hit him up, my man. Claim to be a player, but I fucked your wife. And that was way before the internet was a big deal, too. So that's really the only reason the music video was only for the clean version. But, saying bust instead of fuck ain't exactly lessen the impact much.
Would say it's because it's a diss track that this is unprecedented, but that's not really true either, as Jacob pointed out. Fucking Tupac. But even looking beyond that to modern day, Look What You Made Me Do by Taylor Swift is a diss track. Bad Blood, the version used for the music video happening to feature Kendrick Lamar, is a diss track. I'm sorry, but if the Swifties are used to this and you're not, there's a problem.
Drake was constantly providing updates on social media and making appearances, while Kendrick was radio silent except for the handful of diss tracks he dropped. This feud has been basically a one-character drama because Kendrick keeps himself so private, and because Kendrick basically designed it that way, to be a referendum on Drake. Drake is the protagonist of this story. Drake is the antagonist. When they make the movie about this, it should be told entirely from Drake's perspective, and Kendrick shouldn't show up a single time, like the Germans in Dunkirk. Or maybe he appears out of the corner of Drake's eye sometimes. Kendrick is a phantom. Drake was front and center.
I mean, that's just how Kendrick normally operates, though. He barely uses social media and just stays private until it's time to put it on wax.
Yeah, that doesn't work as much because the music was the primary method of interaction between the two anyway. This being a referendum on Drake was by design, sure, but the extreme depiction you describe doesn't make sense for this, and for reasons way beyond just the fact that part of the paranoia placed into Drake has to be a response to something that Kendrick does, but also for reasons that I'm going to touch on later that even your previous video on this beef just completely overlooked.
In fact, he was the first one to drop a music video while the feud was happening, which that just blows me away. I am in awe of the hubris. Like, he crushed the Good Kid, Mad City van, and he went to New Ho King and everything, and he was showing off his chain, which is a point of contention in the feud for some reason. I don't know.
Aight, motherfucker. First of all, the snake chain ain't part of it. That's him calling Kendrick a snake with visual storytelling. A couple frames after that are actually the chains, multiple, that are important. They originally belonged to Pharrell Williams. Even if you think it's the snake chain, you should be able to tell what the issue about the chain is from the line of the song being played as he fucking shows it off. The lyrics to which are on screen. So you had to see that together when editing your ADR on the video as B-roll. How dumb you gotta be to miss that fucking point?
And again, it's one thing to make a joke or something about missing details to add entertainment value, but that's really not what this is. This is a detail that is directly in front of your face that you seemingly are just not listening to in the slightest. This will be a pattern. In fact, it has been a pattern with a lot of your content, but details.
I'm still here, by the way. I'm just, waiting for him to make some stupid point about production or something. I'm pretty sure that's what I'm here for.
The point is that he wanted this to be an event. He pulled out all the spotlights and the cameras and everything. Like Apollo Creed coming out to Living in America with James Brown and all the dancing girls and then immediately being killed.
Yeah, immediately. Okay, sure. Funnily enough, the Creed versus Drago analogy is more accurate if you actually tell it accurately. Sure, Drake got punches in, but they just didn't phase Kendrick, and he didn't even throw anything in round one until near the end. But when he did start, it was basically insurmountable odds, but Drake was too egotistical to see he already lost. Like, it definitely wasn't immediately getting his shit rocked, even in Rocky, because it's actually, like, really fucking important to that scene that he goes into the corner between rounds, between rounds 1 and 2, as in not a 1-round knockout, as in not immediately. Fucking dumbass. It's almost like you ain't explaining it right because you don't know boxing or rap.
In the past month or so, though, Kendrick finally moved into the protagonist role, starting officially with his first public appearance since the whole thing started, with a one-off concert in LA on Juneteenth. And this was a true celebration of Kendrick. Kendrick united warring street gangs, and then he performed Not Like Us 6 times.
My man, you just explained why this wasn't a celebration of Kendrick with a passing sentence. This was about community, and Kendrick was a uniting factor of it.
Oh, don't worry, or, well, I guess do, depending on your point of view of it. That's not the only thing about cultures he's not part of he won't understand. In fact, he's really gonna double down on that later.
I wasn't gonna worry about him not understanding culture, but then you say he was gonna double down, and now I'm worried.
And then a week ago, he put out a video.
They not like us. They not like us. They not like us.
I live in LA, so I was like seeing and hearing tons of reports on where he was and what he was filming. And since this video has come out, I have heard this song blasting out of other people's cars and scooters whenever I go outside.
Sometimes you gotta pop out and show niggas.
The radio edit for this is hilarious, by the way, if you haven't heard it. Like, half the song is missing, including all the best lines. Probably because it's defamatory to the point of legal liability.
No, it's because you can't put pedophilia on the radio, Todd. It's definitely the pedophile stuff.
Yeah, defamation has nothing to do with it because, if it was, there would already be lawsuits about this and Meet the Grams. There's no way Drake's PR team would just let this sit if it was actual defamation.
Mr. Slayer, the second lawsuit just dropped.
God damn it. Whatever, there are still no lawsuits when Todd's video came out, so my point still stands. And besides, considering Drake's immediate response was to call himself too famous for the allegations, and he brought up the pedo shit first on Taylor Made, yeah, good luck with that shit in court, homie.
Talk that jail shit!
Like, this is not a new observation here, but it's worth repeating how tactically brilliant Kendrick's moves were, because Drake's big song, Family Matters, could have easily dominated the conversation and ruined Kendrick's reputation. Like, there are some very dark accusations in there. But before that could take root, Kendrick had immediately stopped the momentum by releasing his own, even darker song, and then after we all went to bed confused and unsettled, Kendrick released a party song to send the momentum back in the opposite direction.
Well, that's more than just the tactic of disarming Drake's diss track, it's also using Drake's own tactic against him.
Something, by the way, that he hints he's gonna do in Euphoria.
Back to back, I like that record. I'ma get back to that for the record.
Oh, well, you thought he was only talking about 616 in LA?
Yeah, I guess we should bring this up now. Part of the theme of that battle was outdoing Drake at his own tactics, which includes the back-to-back method. And people forget how down-tempo Charged Up actually was, while back-to-back served as the summarized party song. I'm not saying it's exactly one-to-one. Back-to-back and Not Like Us are very different types of beats. Meet the Grants and Charged Up are so different. And the storytelling and theming on display from Kendrick is way better than what Drake was doing to Meek Mill, but well, it's like you said, the whole thing was about Drake, and that includes, to quote myself for a moment here, catching his bullets and chucking them back at him.
You did not just quote your own fucking diss track.
I most certainly did.
Boy, you don't get your goofy ass.
In fact, we should stop and reflect on how many bad moves Drake has made here versus how perfectly Kendrick played every move. Like, Drake recruits J. Cole, who is less than useless in a fight.
And I got my niggas like, what you gonna do, Cole?
You might as well just stick a live grenade down your pants.
So you were, in fact, not paying attention at all. Cool.
Oh yeah, totally. Real intricate recruiting process of putting him on the song he also wanted Kendrick on. Something, by the way, that got hinted at in Euphoria.
Surprised you wanted that feature request. You know that we got some shit to address.
Now, I'm gonna be 100% fair on this one. It does take like about a third grade level of lyrical comprehension in order to understand that that's what's being said here. So I perfectly well understand why Todd in the Shadows, in particular, did not understand that.
And sure, let's pretend that J. Cole doesn't know how to fight anybody. Did you, forget about him boxing Diddy's ears?
Now, in theory, you could just be saying that in the context of like a rap battle, but are we going to pretend that there weren't any good bars in 7-Minute Drill? Are we going to pretend that he can't diss when he did have a respectable response that only became less respectable after he apologized for it? He also beat Lil Pump and basically the entire mumble rap movement in a rap battle without even talking shit about them.
But nah, yeah, right, useless in a fight. Yo ass the one useless in a fight, fucking kid next door father looking ass.
Hip-hop!
But now that Kendrick has finally taken center stage, I think it's worth asking, who exactly is Kendrick in this? There's an old interview from 2014 floating around where 50 Cent was asked what it was like working with Kendrick, and he had this to say.
Kendrick is always going to be a media darling. He has the ability to make you believe he had no idea this was going to happen. Because he'll be like, yo, like, wow, like that energy's there. You knew what you was working.
Right.
You worked on it and it paid off. Don't act like you didn't know it was going to happen. And he was like,
yeah, and that's kind of colored my perception of Not Like Us. Remember, Kendrick started this.
Motherfucker, big three. Nigga, it should beat me. Nigga, pop.
Or at the very least, he's the one who dragged it into public. He's the one who threw the first public shots.
Why the fuck you playing like that when talking about Kendrick throwing public shots?
Yeah, like, for one, Drake and Kendrick have been sneak dissing each other for a long-ass time, but you know when the first public shots were thrown? August 14th, 2013.
We usually homeboys with the same niggas I'm rhyming with, but this is hip-hop and them niggas should know what time it is.
Cole responded to this, Drake was pretty openly butthurt about it, and pretty much every single YouTube video covering the beef other than yours has pointed out that the whole thing starts all the way back here. I mean, yeah, Kendrick was the first one to take shots, but it wasn't like that. And based on everything Kendrick was saying at the time, it wasn't intended to be outright beef, but rather an invitation to competition.
Oh, of course, if you just want to count the recent shit, it was Future that started it. Shut the fuck up. The verse was on a whole fucking album of Drake disses. If you're gonna ignore Control, then you have to talk about the fact that Kendrick got recruited into somebody else's beef, difference being that he just took that shit over.
Remember, he is responding to this line.
Love when they argue the hardest MC. Is it K-Dot, is it Aubrey or me?
Which, one, didn't come from Drake, and two, is not an insult.
Hey, can we run the second half of that real quick?
We the big three like we started a league, but right now I feel like Muhammad Ali.
Wow, it's almost like he's saying that he respects the other two, but still thinks of himself as above them, especially when he follows it up later like this.
The Spider-Man meme is me looking at Drake.
In other words, it's a big three, alright, but there's definitely a big two within that.
It's not like Drake ain't up on that narrative like it was. Whoa, holy shit.
I'm like 90% sure you can't say that.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Just put some silence in there instead.
Why do I get the impression this is a very specific reference?
Look. All I know is the GNX by Kendrick Lamar is a very good album.
Even granting that Kendrick was deeply personally wronged by the motherfucker and he had it coming, Kendrick is supposed to be like the activist, right? The artist. Why is he doing this? Why is a Pulitzer winner taking the stage on Juneteenth to do 6 encores where he does nothing but shit on a professional rival? Like, Drake touches kids seems like a weird Juneteenth message to me, especially in an election year. Like, we got nothing better to talk about than one guy who sucks.
I'm sorry. In a climate with Diddy's charges, you're really gonna ask that question?
And beyond that, you think that maybe the reasoning you just gave for how personally wrong Kendrick was could be part of how it escalated like that? And lest we forget what was in Drake's the day before Not Like Us. I mean, he did call Kendrick a wife beater.
And before that concert, Drake, as Jacob pointed out earlier, responded to the allegations by saying he was too famous to not get caught doing that shit. When even ignoring the climate of the Diddy indictment has been proven to be the worst offense you could ever make to that more times than anyone should feel comfortable with throughout human history, even if you go back to Jimmy fucking Savile.
There's also you thinking the only thing he said against Drake was the shit to call him a predator? I mean, yeah, okay, he did a lot of calling him a predator, but it wasn't just about touching kids, it was also about...
No. Part of that is part of the reason we're covering this. Just save it.
Boon, you are not telling me this spook-ass little bitch tries...
But you gotta be careful saying shit like that about Kendrick. Like, I said on Twitter once that, my very favorite Kendrick songs aren't the ones about deep issues. It's the ones about drinking too much and wanting to be left alone.
Sometimes I need to be alone.
Very me songs. And then a bunch of Kendrick stans got on me. I was like, oh, you don't get it. Those songs were actually very deep about the culture of alcoholism and its effects on the... God, Kendrick fans are so corny.
Okay, but that literally is what Swimming Pools is about. It starts with him talking about family members struggling with alcoholism, and the bridge at the end provides a direct and incredibly obvious comparison between shots from a gun and shots of alcohol.
Yeah, I feel like finding basic levels of lyrical analysis corny is a bad look, coming from, I don't know, let's say, for example, a pop music critic!
Hey, watch that shit, Boon. You won't want to get called corny by Todd in the chat. Goddamn, I can't say that shit with a straight face. This motherfucker the whole damn cob.
But they have a point. He is Kendrick Lamar. He's earned the benefit of the doubt. So let's see what he's saying here. Starting with how he nullified Drake's attacks. Like, since this whole thing has broken out, I have thought a lot about how I'd handle a rap beef with Kendrick Lamar in a lot of the same way that Aaron Carter used to dream of beating Shaq at basketball. But if I were in the unenviable position of battling Kendrick, like if I were Drake in this position, I'd have two moves. neither of which were making receiptless accusations about his personal life, for the record. Do not do that. Okay, but here's what I do. One, you make him look like a phony and a hypocrite. Like, you're calling me a pop star. You're the pop star, Mr. Marvel soundtrack.
Yeah, okay, I get what you're saying here, but that angle works a lot better as the response than what you come out the gate with.
And yeah, Drake did actually use this. You're about to point that out. I'm going to discuss how it was one of the biggest holes in what he said. But, well, first thing to address is that it just straight up wasn't said in response. And while you could use it to sort of 8-mile the subject before it comes up, that's not really the way Drake used it in the first place. But again, we're gonna have to talk about that in a moment.
And that approach doesn't really work in the first place when the song that, according to you at least, incited the whole thing had Drake directly comparing himself to Michael Jackson, so no matter which way you slice it, it's not exactly the defensive angle you're making it out to be.
Making songs with Taylor Swift and The Weeknd and Sia and SZA and whoever. And Drake did try and punch in that direction, but he completely fucked it up. His whole line of attack is that Kendrick is a little bitch who has to do what his label tells him to do.
Top one make you do features for change. Get on pop breakers and rap for the whites and wait.
No, you moron. That's what Kendrick wants you to think. That works in his favor. That lets him explain why he's out here collaborating with Imagine Dragons. Like,
that wasn't even the main point of what Drake said. Hell, it wasn't even close to the main point of what Drake said. He's saying that his old label head, Top Dog, was extorting him.
Look, dog, I'm aware that you're so far out of the culture that you don't even know where the house is or why that's actually a reference to the culture, but what it's actually doing is actually closing that opening of him having an explanation, because the explanation also makes him look bad. I mean, by the time he said it in Family Matters, it was kind of lame though. But it don't have to do with the angle being wrong in the first place, but really because Kendrick already disarmed that shit.
Hey, Top Dog, who the fuck they think they playing with? Extortion my middle name as soon as you jump off of that plane, bitch.
And I mean, look, maybe it's just me, but I feel like calling someone a slave to the whims of their label is actually technically a good angle of attack, so your reason for it not being bad is, well, kind of just not very good.
Yeah, the real reason it sucks, well, okay, one of many real reasons it sucks, is because, in actuality, Drake's the one that's a slave to his label, and if you don't believe me, go look and see how his fans are justifying those lawsuits. I'll wait. I won't fuck.
Oh, the label made him do it. And since he broke free of his contract, he has not done any of that, so there you go. You gave him an out, you dummy.
Beyonce? America has a problem? Ring any bells?
Boon, do you really expect this much of a basic-ass bitch to remember anything that isn't so overplayed that it may as well be by Nickelback featuring Imagine Dragons?
I'm sorry, you can't talk about the Black Panther soundtrack being music for white people. Shut your whole ass up.
Actually, no, he's saying it's music for a pop audience. A distinction that's gonna piss both of us off the more that we hear it. And the more that he elaborates on it, actually. Think about it.
Wait, is that why he mentioned SZA?
In that case, gentlemen, allow me to do you one better. Because he definitely recorded with Taylor Swift after 2022. Or did you guys not realize that the two of them doing the Bad Blood remix was their idea to begin with?
Oh, yeah, right, that whole Taylor's version thing. Wow, I did not think that was gonna come up.
Oh, yeah, right. And the thing is, the existence of the song actually destroys Drake's narrative of him being forced to work in pop way more than making an excuse that Kendrick can make does. I mean, the whole reason for the re-recordings is because of Scooter Braun not giving Taylor her masters. And in the case of the remix, Kendrick's master, which I can imagine Kendrick also had a vested interest in. So, even if it was extortion from TDE that made the song happen in the first place, it proves that him working with pop artists really does have nothing to do with TDE, at the very least in the case of Taylor Swift.
So if that's not how you're going to take it, then you can try the other tactic I thought of, which is use being a pop star to your advantage. He makes you look like a corny sellout, you make him look like a pretentious snob. It doesn't have to be true necessarily, it just has to be true enough. Like, Kendrick is a guy who gets up on his high horse about Photoshop and plastic surgery. He was on his last album lecturing his fans about liking him too much.
That's not what Mr. Morale was.
You know, honestly, I feel like we'd be here until the 2035 Super Bowl if we went over every instance of him not understanding what things are about.
This is a really big instance of that, though. Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers was in no way about people liking him too much. It was about generational trauma You know how the flaws that you see as a child by your parents can often be repeated, even if you're aware of the problem and work to avoid the same thing? You know, like, if, for example, if your dad didn't know how to talk through difficult subjects, so he just kind of bottled up those frustrations and pushed them into training instead, even though it really doesn't solve anything, he kind of unintentionally learned to handle your issues the same way. You know, maybe as an example. What?
There's an opening there, is what I'm saying. And Drake did attempt this also.
Always rapping like you about to get the slaves free. Kendrick just opened his mouth. Someone go hand him a Grammy right now.
So, I think what we should do here is go over both of these lines in relation to how they work with the overall narrative of the battle, and Todd's assertion that they're attacking a perceived pretension in Kendrick's music.
We'll start with rapping like you're trying to get the slaves free, because, homie, that is not an angle of attack. It's an attempt to attack this angle, but in reality is going at a different angle, which, you know, the context of the bar lays out pretty well.
Always rapping like you about to get the slaves freed. You just acting like an activist. It's make believe. Don't even go back to your hood and plant no money trees.
Yeah, I think the worst part about you missing that shit is that it ain't even a double, homie. He just says that Kendrick's pretending to be an activist. I mean, that's definitely related to his deep shit being pretentious, sure, but really it's saying that it's fake deep, which is different from the way J. Cole went at the angle you're talking about.
Your first shit was classic, your last shit was tragic. Your second shit put niggas to sleep, but they gassed it.
He just straight up said that people were overrating his music. It was less personal of a jab, but more about the music than about Kendrick as a person, which is the angle Drake was going at, being more personal, that is. I could spend a ton of time talking about how this jab was actually real well done in terms of keeping defenses against the rebuttal up, but this shit ain't really about 7-minute drill, and I really need to only point out one other aspect of how these are different. Cole's diss, at the very least, can fall in the realm of subjectivity. Drake's is just a fucking lie. Kendrick does put money back into Compton. He is about as literally planting money trees as physically possible. That's, you know, one of the ways this angle fails. The other one, considering Kendrick directly rebuttals it for an entire verse on Not Like Us, is something I'm sure we're going to talk about later.
Oh, actually, the thing we're going to be saving for later is the fact that he doesn't cover that at all.
Boy, I'm about to spike up your dome piece. Turn Todd in the Shadows into Shadow the Hedgehog, motherfucker.
Hey, whoops, almost forgot about the second line there. You know, the somebody give him a Grammy right now. That was actually kind of a funny dismissal of Kendrick's accomplishments, but at the same time, it's also one that Kendrick doesn't really need to counter. It kind of just, you know, it's just there, and he doesn't really need to do anything to make it a diss. J. Cole did more to do that on 7-Minute Drill than Drake did.
Funny thing about it, bitch, I don't even want the prestige. Fuck the Grammys, cause them crackers ain't never done nothing for me. Ho.
And unlike, you know, what Drake had to say about it, it actually goes into Drake's angle of making music for white people. Kendrick wins Grammys because he appeals to these old white guys. At least that's the thesis of what J. Cole was saying here. Part of the reason that Drake's punch didn't really land is because he didn't go after the Grammys as an institution for it, which there are clear underlying reasons for that maybe having to do with Drake's constant jealousy over not getting the same accolades. So he can't really call them out as a white institution in the same way that J. Cole can. Or else his desire for critical acclaim from them serves to help Kendrick in a very direct fashion.
And at the very least, it's the actual thing you're talking about Drake doing, unlike the first one. And some of you are probably wondering why we need to make this whole giant diatribe about what these lyrics are actually about and how they play into the narrative of the battle.
Actually, wait, yeah, why do we need to do that? I thought this video was about Todd.
Boon, okay, I know you're not used to having series other than Boon Cannon, but, like, if you wanted to do a breakdown, you could have just done it. You didn't need to get me and Jacob in here for it.
There's a reason this is an actual commentary, okay? It all stems back to how little Todd seems to understand the narrative of the battle. And trust me, his lack of understanding is going to get far worse, enough to justify this being Boon Cannon, okay?
That's what made Not Like Us such a brilliant move. It neutralized that completely. He made a song that sounds like fucking Lean Back, and there are lines in it where he flows like Chingy or somebody.
Say Drake, I hear you like I'm young. You better not ever go to...
Say he sounds like Chingy. Play Nelly. Bitch, what?
Hey, Jake, when were you gonna tell me that 3 words makes up an entire flow?
I wasn't. 'Cause it fucking don't. Yo, Todd, have you actually ever listened to Kendrick rap, like, once in your fucking life? Because that whole wavy flow he got going on, that ain't no shit. Have you never heard Humble? DNA? King Kunta? You were talking about swimming pools earlier. It's got him riding a beat at points. Just because it got subject matter don't mean it's not a bop.
Oh, trust me. That comment is going to be relevant later. Although, admittedly, it's going to be a lot more of what Dale and I have to say.
Wait a minute, me? Boon, I'm not sure if you noticed, but Jake knows a lot more about rap than me. Chances are it's going to be something he knows a little bit better than I do.
See, the problem here is that you're assuming that the thing you're going to be pissed about is rap-related.
Oh, for fuck's sake.
You know, just a perfect demonstration of Drake that, you know, I can do what you do, you can't do what I do. So that's why Drake never landed that knockout blow. But again, this is supposed to be about Kendrick, and Kendrick had 2 lines of attack of his own. The first is that Drake sucks as a person.
Fucked on Wayne Grow while he was in jail. That's conniving.
In fact, all of the diss tracks he issued hammered that one. This hit a lot harder than Drake's attempts to do it to Kendrick because Drake demonstrably does suck as a person. And I think that's just something we could all kind of sense.
Oh, it ain't like he, lost a beef to the exact same shit before. Oh, including the fact that he's just kind of using black culture and the white side of his culture comes out way more predominant when you look at the way he actually acts. That was like a huge part of Kenny's angle.
And yet, for some reason, the fact that it doesn't come up at all when talking about the way that Kendrick was attacking Drake, in spite of the fact it was the cheap subject of a whole verse of Not Like Us, was incredibly prevalent in Euphoria, to the point where what was said in Euphoria about Drake using the N-word was attempted to be rebutted by Drake in the first line of Family Matters.
Now, to be fair, it might not be something that Todd knows enough about to feel comfortable commenting on.
Yeah, sure. Keep that defense in mind.
But you know what? Let me just go ahead and debunk that while we're at it. You don't think he understands race enough to talk about race? Maybe he, shouldn't be talking about a song inherently about race? Even if it's gonna get him a bunch of views? Or is he just a greedy fuck?
I mean, hey, you tell me. At the very least, he could acknowledge that it was part of the angle, but not a part of it he understands well enough to comment on. But he just, kind of pretends it doesn't exist, even though it's incredibly obvious. You could argue it's part of the being a bad person angle, but something seems very weird about the fact that he's dancing around bringing it up on such a consistent basis.
Like, I had some kind of misplaced sympathy for the guy because everyone was ganging up on him, but what I should have been asking is,
man, what did he do to make them that mad?
Like, what is he like in real life that everyone, including his closest collaborators, all hate his guts? Like this whole line right here.
You ain't in no big 3. SZA got you wiped down. Travis got you wiped down. Savage got you wiped down.
SZA's not a rapper. Can he really not think of a third guy he's on good enough terms with to name drop?
Hey, why it gotta be a guy? Nicki Minaj is right there.
I mean, ignoring the fact that these statements are, kind of incorrect.
Honestly, the especially funny part about this particular point is that he seems to think that Drake's on decent terms with SZA of all people, while Drake is slandering her label boss.
And of course, Kendrick's biggest thing during this was to amplify the rumors that, Drake is trolling around high schools looking for girls. Now, I said this in the first video, I'm not super comfortable with this. Like, floating accusations of a crime this serious without any receipts to back it up, man, I don't know about that. On the other hand, I am a firm believer in turnabout being fair play. Drake was the one to open that can of worms. He went low first. He was the one who started throwing accusations around. I think I heard something once about a rule in Looney Tunes that Bugs Bunny had to get smacked 3 times before he retaliate.
Of course you realize this means war.
You know, so he never looks like a bully. That's exactly the move Kendrick pulled. He played it perfectly.
I mean, he was already kind of hitting at that on Euphoria.
We hate the bitches you fuck cause they confuse themselves with real women.
That line hits a little different after knowing his angle after Family Matters, don't it?
And, you know, Drake's actually the one who brought up talking about him liking young girls. Or, I guess more accurately, AI Tupac did, but still.
So, for those of you wondering why I'm not playing the clip from Tailor Made Freestyle to prove my point, that specific thing is why. Honestly, Drake deserves to be canceled for that alone. Oh, and by the way, that wife beater angle, yeah, Kendrick also predicted that.
Fabricating stories on the family front cause you heard Mr. Morale.
That's something, by the way, he'd continue doing on the fake version of The Heart Part 6, by the way, when he brought up Mother I Sober as the reason Kendrick was supposedly obsessed with pedo allegations, which, I mean, you know, I'd imagine if you actually thought that they were true, there might be better reasons to feel like it's worth focusing on, but, you know, maybe that's just me.
So even though that's the most serious accusation, I actually don't find it as interesting as the second main attack that Kendrick pulls, which is that Drake sucks as an artist.
There's some B-rest that's for bitching. You Malibu most wanted.
Now that's very interesting to me.
Yeah. Interesting's the right word, I guess. Especially since he doesn't actually say that Drake sucks as an artist. In fact, he pretty early says the opposite of that.
I like Drake with the melodies. I don't like Drake when he act tough.
Like, this is the same song where he praises back to back. Come on, man.
You know, that line you played about Malibu's Most Wanted is a real interesting example of your point, though. I mean, do you know what that movie's about? It's about a suburban white guy pretending to be a hardcore gangster rapper. So, Todd, what do you think that line is saying about Drake? Yeah, funny how you ignore the blackness of Kendrick's stance again.
Now, given what the overall point is about to be, you could argue that he doesn't think that this is part of black culture, but instead more so about authenticity. But here's the thing. The authenticity argument and the debate about Drake's blackness are, in the instance of this beef, intrinsically linked to the point where talking about one without talking about the other feels, at the very least, a little bit dishonest.
Like, there have been a lot of shots about how Drake isn't real hip-hop, and Kendrick goes into a lot of detail about it. Now, I personally am not equipped to talk about real hip-hop, but I come from this from a pop perspective, and as a pop critic, this kinda hits something for me.
I mean, I'd argue you in particular aren't really qualified to talk about this from a pop perspective either, based on what you're gonna say. Trust me, that's gonna make sense in a moment. But let's just focus on why you're talking about the beef in general at all is flawed with you not knowing hip-hop, starting with the fact that you made an entire other video on the beef as though you understood the hip-hop aspect of the climate and still got things wrong.
So, the thing about you being a pop music critic, right? You're not a critic of the genre of pop, you're more of a critic of music that happens to be popular. In the first video, in fact, you actually went into detail about rap having reduced popularity and the trends that seem to fuel more prominence for the genre. That's what you're good at least what you present as being good at, talking about what does and does not resonate with a common audience, and not necessarily the sound that is associated with being pop. And even then, if you look at the history, it's evolved over time. It originally encompassed mostly rock music, but now a lot of the influences people associate with the pop genre are more fueled by rhythm and blues. Which admittedly also has its origins in rock, but still, that's an evolution in and of itself to talk about, honestly.
Speaking of that evolution, nowadays hip-hop is an intrinsic part of pop. You said it yourself in the previous video. The only person that was outselling Drake was Taylor Swift. Rap guest verses on songs by non-rap acts are now the norm instead of a novelty. Country was even trying to cop rap Zora at one point. At some point, you gotta learn a thing or two about the culture, even if your knowledge of it is rooted in the modern understanding and not the roots of it. And it's not like rap as pop is even a new concept. I mean, Tupac ring any bells? Biggie? Jay-Z? Wayne? Fuck, Kendrick himself? And that's part of an overarching problem. Todd seems to think that he can talk about a popular song without really talking about its underlying genre. Something that I actually don't really see him try to do as much with One Hit Wonderland, interestingly enough. But I've seen it for years when EDM was at the top of the charts, and now he's doing it again with rap. And I'm not even saying there's anything wrong with looking at rap from the lens of pop, by all means. But you still have to get some kind of understanding of the genre if you're going to talk about something that is culturally involved with the genre, like the Drake and Kendrick beef. We've already addressed a lot of what you don't understand on that front. And now we get to talk about how you don't understand it from a pop perspective either.
I made a stray comment about this in the first video, but I want to expand on it here, so let's roll way back. For the last 20 years, music criticism has been shaped by a movement called poptimism. What's the deal with this pop life? Which existed in opposition to rockism. Which, it's rock supremacy, basically.
I just want a real quick freeze frame on this, because combined with the way that you explain poptimism in the way that you do, it paints a very specific image of what you mean when you talk about poptimism as a movement, which is more or less correct for now, but note how it portrays all electronic music as pop and basically defines classic rock as the antithesis of this, even though, you know, Journey exists.
At the same time, when looked at from a more broad lens, poptimism is about progressivism, not necessarily in forms of political ideology, but rather what it means for music to be authentic. Basically a pushback on the idea of newer music being bad because of its use of electronic instruments, but instead of focusing criticism on how these instruments are used.
An unsurprising level of nuance coming from someone I personally have publicly criticized for not understanding that a synth line can have emotive meaning, even if that emotive meaning isn't energetic. So, like, that's the thing about what I just said. You're the rockist here. You've been rockist for decades now. Keep that in mind as we go forward.
And it was a big criticism of all the big journalists and gatekeepers of music at that time.
Okay, small criticism here, but, well, Rolling Stone is a magazine about rock music. I don't think it really makes sense to be judgmental of Rolling Stone for being preferential towards the genre it's basically named after. Yeah, that's like getting on a XXL for not covering Taylor Swift, especially since the band on the cover in this case is Aerosmith, which is cap when talking about the narrow definition of rock that's in relation to rockism, considering, I mean, you know, the whole Run DMC thing. They were one of the first rock acts to embrace hip-hop.
Never mind Aerosmith's use of synths over the years, and I don't just mean guitar pedals. Dream On is well known for its keyboard riff, Dude Looks Like a Lady heavily uses sampling, if you think Ragdoll's Kick and Stare aren't artificially sweetened, you're dreaming, and those horns in most of their songs? Why do you think they're never played live?
Now, to be fair... Yeah, this fits in more with the ideals of rockism than someone like Natasha Bedingfield or her brother Daniel Bedingfield. Yes, that's a real person. But all that does is serve to highlight how silly the rockism argument is when you break it down. The elements that rockists chastise are elements that even the classic rock bands they praise heavily utilized. After all, the DAW was the synth keyboard, before that it was the effects pedal, and before that was the music studio itself.
Before this, the idea that we would talk about like Christina Aguilera as like a real serious artist, it was a joke. She wasn't a real musician like Eric Clapton or whoever. In 2002, Pitchfork wrote a joke review of Kylie Minogue. What's the joke, you're asking? That is the joke. The joke is that Pitchfork reviewed Kylie Minogue. The idea that this would be funny is so dated, it may as well be written in hieroglyphics. The joke doesn't make any sense at all these days, where everyone, including Pitchfork, treats Ariana Grande with the same weight and gravity that they used to cover Radiohead with. That's what Poptimism was all about, dismissing all the snobbery that said we would never review someone as shallow as Kylie Minogue. Like, we wrote all that off as a bunch of tedious boomer shit coming from gatekeeping old white guys. Drop your preconceptions about authenticity or whatever. Sometimes you just want to dance. Sometimes you just want to listen to something catchy, and that's okay. And more than okay, it's worthy of praise, we all decided.
You know, I was about to give you a skip screen on that one because you were just saying a bunch of correct things, but, no. It's not just sometimes you want to dance. The definition you gave even specifically highlights rockism as being about the use of electronic instruments.
And even if you want to say it's about authenticity, it's not even saying that sometimes you want something mindless. In fact, saying sometimes you just want to dance as the endpoint is the opposite of what everything else you said implies. That pop music has artistic value, and it being catchy and marketable doesn't really take away from that.
I also noticed you ain't playing any rap songs when talking about all this. Could it be that rap was already being taken seriously from an artistic perspective by this point, and thus wasn't involved in this conversation? So, may want to get to how this is relevant to Kendrick and Drake pretty quick, all I'm saying. That's history lesson to give context to what he was about to say. It took like 4 bars, homie.
Nowadays, we respect pop. Or do we? For all that the discourse has been shaped by quote-unquote poptimism, pop is still an insult when you apply it to genres other than pop music. Pop rap is still an insult. Pop country is still an insult. If you called Coldplay pop, you would understand that as an insult because they're supposed to be an alternative rock band, allegedly. So being called pop cheapens them.
I mean, other than the fact that most of the time this is stuff that hipsters say is an insult and not the majority of people, and I should know, when you're talking about popularity, generally people aren't even going to pay attention to a subgenre designation, and if they do, it's really just an indicator that the subgenre uses sounds and methodologies associated with pop as a genre, rather than pop as an indication of popularity.
There are also plenty of pop-named subgenres that aren't treated as insults, but I can name you one specific one that actually seems like it should be the primary one that would be an insult. Pop punk. Think about it, the genre that is specifically about being anti-establishment, sounding like that genre from the lens of the musical establishment. And somehow that's one of the main versions of this trope that is embraced by those who are classified under it.
Hey, you know who the only person I've heard using the term pop rap since 2014 is? Or, better yet, the only person I've ever heard talk about pop country? That'd be you. And you're also the main one using the idea of calling a band like Coldplay pop rock as an insult.
And even then, maybe the insult in a situation like that has less to do with pop being a dirty word and more to do with the feeling misclassified or put into a box where the type of music they make doesn't matter because of the fact that they're popular.
Wait. So you mean to tell me that the guy who's ignoring the ramifications on hip-hop culture in a hip-hop beat don't understand that the insult isn't ignoring the culture the one's music comes from?
Yeah, I very much actually, in fact, do mean to say that.
Funny how that works, ain't it, Spooks?
That's why the criticism of Drake hits weird for me. Like, I hear all the shit people say, you know, it's shallow, it's superficial, it's all image, it's music for girls, he doesn't even write it himself. These are all things I heard said about Britney Spears and the Backstreet Boys before poptimism existed.
Yeah, none of those things are calling him bad for being pop, but pointing out specific criticisms that also apply to previous pop acts. Me and Jacob did a whole video on ghostwriting and rap too, and my stance is in agreement with you on that front.
But that don't mean that ghostwriting can't be a valid criticism, especially if you lying about it, which was one of the main reasons Drake gets blasted for it.
And more proof, by the way, you don't understand what poptimism is, because shallow is still a valid criticism of music under poptimism, because the point is about genres being dismissed as shallow, not the actual piece of work being called shallow, because the critic perceives a lack of depth in that particular work.
And even that interpretation kind of misses something that poptimism tacitly says about using shallow as a criticism. It's kind of superficial and meaningless on its own anyway. And that's also not a criticism people were actually leveling at Drake. Last year, I covered Dose of Buckley's Worst Songs of 2023 video when I defended Drake, not on how shallow his music was, and kind of on the fake gangster criticism he was actually getting for his work with 21 Savage.
Mostly saying him being not gangster because he's from Canada is stupid as fuck, Crody.
Stupid as fuck, Crody, indeed. But my primary defense was in regards to the nepotism, an angle you may notice that nobody has taken in the entirety of 2024. Now, you may be wondering, why would I not discuss Drake being shallow in that video? Well, because Buckley didn't mention it. Almost like it wasn't a topic of discussion at the time.
I never want to hear either one of you say Crody again. Shallow is the shit they were saying about Drake in, like, 2014. Weird how that year keeps being the one your mindset comes from. Almost like that's when you actually were successful and you just stayed there, but, you know, whatever.
To be fair, don't. The elements of the overall point of these criticisms you're talking about is not having a lot of meaning makes sense. Although, I think you're doing what a lot of people do, which is confusing surface level summary of what someone does or doesn't like for an actual proper critique. I don't know, maybe it's the old man in me talking, but people seem to want the rapid-fire flashy version of what you don't like something over the nuanced response, to the point where even a quick response that has nuance gets the nuance ignored in favor of just insult comedy. And don't get me wrong, the quick version that lacks nuance does have value in highlighting the part of the problem and creating discussion about the nuance. But the problem I'm seeing is that rather than using it to catch attention to the delivery of the nuanced message, it's become a replacement for the detail needed entirely. And you, in turn, are definitely not helping that situation by not only what you do here, treating the one-word answer as the full argument, but also stripping the nuance from something, like poptimism, to the point where that lack of nuance makes it mean something very different from what it actually does. I would think that you would know this considering you take your time in making a lot of your scripts, but, well, in reality, you're falling for the same thing. The only difference is, as we're going to see, it leads to a very faulty game of telephone being played with the meaning behind things.
And I always kind of wondered what it would look like if pop raptimism existed.
Ain't 20v1, it's 1v20 if I gotta smack niggas that right with you.
Like this shit about ghostwriters, who cares?
Homie, that is literally the only line that Kendrick said about ghostwriters in, at this point, 15 songs. And that shit was a rebuttal to Drake talking about being dogpiled anyway. He's mad at a bunch of people coming for his neck, pointing out he's got a whole team behind his scenes is a valid way to double back against that. In fact, you're about to explain the very problem with your statement that we were just talking about. Well, that he was just talking about. I kind of just stood here.
Like, it's been an open secret that Dr. Dre doesn't necessarily write all his own stuff. He's still one of the greats. I mean, there he is standing with Kendrick right there.
Yeah, but the problem isn't just that Drake has writers. The problem is that
you lied about your ghostwriters. You lied about your crew members.
You know, I'm pretty sure the reason that you think Kendrick fans are corny is because you finally hit the age where your ears stop working.
No, bullshit. I'm only like 3 years younger than him, and my hearing's fine.
I mean, yeah, but you spend a lot less time listening to Flow Rider.
Yeah, actually, I suppose that would do it.
And Snoop uses ghostwriters now too. He's admitted it. He's not one bit ashamed of it. He cited Diana Ross, one of the greatest ever pop stars, as his reason. So like, you know, what if? What if pop rappers were given any respect? What if the big three were Flo Rida, Pitbull, and Fergie?
Except they don't sell as well as Drake, Kendrick Lamar, and J. Cole. Sales are part of what makes the big three, and Flo Rida sales weren't ever as big as any of those three. Okay, well, maybe at one point he was above J. Cole, but...
Funny you should say that, because the point you're about to make, I can make it better. So we've already established how, based on the criticisms he gets, Drake seems to fit the pop rap mold, right? He does in ways that actually matter to pop as a genre as well. Many of his most popular songs are more so about hype and self-aggrandizing than conflict, especially the type of conflict rap is usually about. And while that's changed somewhat in more recent years, what hasn't is his tendency to be more melodic. He even sings on a lot of his songs. J. Cole is someone also known for positivity to the point where his biggest rap beat before all of this involved him wishing well of the person dissing him and sitting down for an on-camera conversation with him at an award show. If you want to talk about positive lyricism, J. Cole has a song about doing chores for his wife. He's one step below Chance the Rapper on the virtue scale when it comes to his lyrics. It's no wonder he backed out when it came to diss track season. It's just not his style. And as for melodic, although he did that more with his initial hits, including when he sampled Paul Abdul for his first big hit.
Oh, damn, I almost forgot about that shit. Hey, we got a good thing. Don't know if I'ma see you again.
Okay. So it's really easy to make the argument that 2 out of the big 3 are pop rap. So when a battle initiates involving them, look who comes out on top. The one who doesn't have the pop elements and focuses on being the best at his genre, proving that people don't actually want rap to mix with pop in as a direct fashion as having the same artist doing both genres, which is part of the point you're about to make, but again, doing it my way, you don't even have to bring up artists that haven't been popular since... Okay, admittedly, they were popular in 2018, but we'll just say 2014 just to stick with the meme that you're 10 years behind instead of 5 or 6.
It sounds ridiculous, right? We don't think that way. Kendrick proved it.
You run to Atlanta when you need a few dollars. No, you're not a colleague, you a fucking colonizer.
Not Like Us is one of the most stunning defeats of poptimism I've ever seen. Like, the chorus is not like us.
They not like us. They not like us. They not like us.
That's literally gatekeeping. That's the literal definition of gatekeeping. Kendrick attacks Drake for being a pop star. Kendrick destroys Drake for being a pop star.
No, he doesn't. Carolina Blue kicks fresh on the... oh, shit, sorry. Yeah, actually, Kendrick don't give a fuck about Drake being pop.
I like Drake with the melodies. I don't like Drake when he act tough.
That's one of the biggest problems with you acting like this is about pop and not about hip-hop. Because Kendrick's issue with Drake is with hip-hop. You even played the colonizer line from Not Like Us right before saying this, where he said it himself. He's here for the money and not for the culture. So you can't really say that you don't know the culture and talk about Kendrick attacking him for pop. You're right though, it is gatekeeping, but for one, you should really watch FD Signifier's video on the subject to understand why some amount of gatekeeping is good and intrinsic to hip-hop and black culture to prevent people from taking advantage of it. And for two, the gate Kendrick builds is very much about the pedophilia allegations leveled at, well, kind of Drake's entire team, really, as well as the other ways that Drake is just a bad person.
They are, in fact, not like us. Not in terms of musical genre, but in terms of moral standing. That's why the issues of Drake being a bad person are relevant to why he says that they're not like us.
And it kind of makes me wonder what poptimism has actually meant. Like, what is it? What was the meaning behind this? And my conclusion is it means the gays like it. Right? That's all it means?
You gotta be fucking kidding me!
Okay, please tell me this man did not just say that.
Yeah, so, now you guys know why I'm here. This is the most head-ass thing that you could have ever fucking said in your life. But hey, you know what? I'm a nice guy. I'll let you... Bitch, I'm fucking not! The fuck you mean poptimism was about music the gays like? For one, the gays like whatever fucking music we want to. Shut the fuck up trying to gatekeep based on sexual preference. For two, what the fuck does that say about the pop music reviewer that straight up don't understand the shit that would fall under the anti-rockism umbrella that poptimism falls under, not being taken seriously? You know, all the EDM that you don't get because you don't go to clubs? Well, I guess just fucking gay clubs, right? Third of all, fuck you in the general sense, non-sexually. I ain't interested. Got better taste than men. Yo, pasty ass, wanna be Zora looking head ass, fucking hoodie looking like it ain't been washed in 6 months looking ass. Fuck out of here with that bullshit.
I think what Jake means is that this bitch needs to choose his next words very carefully.
No, that ain't what I meant. I meant he can get out of here right now. That might be what you meant. That ain't what I meant.
Poptimism is, I think, inextricable from the rise of gay rights as a mainstream movement.
Okay, so what Jake said he means is now what I mean. What the hell are you talking about? Poptimism as a term was coined around 2006. The first gay pride parade was in 1994. Pitchfork wouldn't make fun of Kylie Minogue until 8 years after gay pride was allowed to be acknowledged on a widespread basis, and that even assumes you want to place the start of the movement there, when the modern movement really goes back to roughly 1988, and that assumes we separate it from the focus on the AIDS crisis. And even way before that, you have the 1970 Pride marches, Stonewall, and that shit. And the only reason I'd separate the 1988 movement from that is because of how much of the leadership, died of AIDS in the interim.
Okay, look. Todd, you and I are both from the South. Well, slightly allegedly in your case, but I'll just let that slide. Considering the progression of things in relation to where we're from, I can see why you, a straight man, would not have inherently known this. I'm from a state where my sexual orientation was literally illegal until 2003, and one of the 2 states that still has more people against same-sex marriage than for it. So, as both somewhat aware of the zeitgeist of pop music and the ramifications of the LGBTQ movement on a first-hand level, what you just said is complete horseshit. And you did a video where you debunked James Somerton in detail on things he got wrong in regards to LGBTQ issues. But then you want to turn around and make a half-assed, half-baked, and borderline offensive designation like this. Jacob's right. Go fuck yourself. Then maybe you'll know something about our struggle.
And once the gays became widely understood as a marginalized demographic worth respecting, so too did quote-unquote gay music. One of the big attacks on rockism was being homophobic, and one of the first major moves of poptimism was a reevaluation of disco. That's why shitting on pop music now gets you the same dirty looks that disliking rap music does, because of all those concrete ties to a respectable social movement.
Okay, I will at least slightly function in defense of Todd here. He's painting poptimism as existing long before the term did by playing a clip of 90s EDM when talking about the acceptability of gay music, which to some extent I can see at least making the argument for, but it does fly in the face of the narrative through line presented in this video. Remember, the 2002 Pitchfork review of Kylie Minogue was an example of the heights of rockism, and you yourself, Todd, said earlier that poptimism was the last 20 years. And the only way to put that even close to the right time frame is if you said something like that in 2014. Yeah, actually, pretty much exactly then.
Yeah, funny how that shit works, ain't it?
So for all that quote-unquote poptimism has replaced rockism, it kind of feels like it's just the same thing with a coat of pink paint on it. Rock fans were pretentious about rock because it was the sound of rebellion and youth, and hip-hop is the sound of the disenfranchised, and now pop has its movement. Genre respect is still tied to its social importance.
Okay, first of all, while I get why you think throwing around a pink coat of paint is cool and all, that's more so an association with gay men, and actually has pretty sexist connotations involving gay men being treated as less of a man because of their sexuality. So purple or lavender is the preferable gay color, because even though the historical association with gay men is still there, it doesn't have as strong of a sexist undertone, albeit specifically saying lavender tends to have a little bit more of a association with being borderline a slur. You're saying anything about a pink coat of paint comes across as either homophobic, sexist, or both. Take your pick how you want to look like a piece of shit today. I don't even think you meant it like that either. I just think you have no clue what you're talking about.
Something you said leads me towards a potential homophobic undertone that you might not be aware of, though. I think it tells a lot that you view a movement that is asking for a genre of music to not be treated as lesser artistically the same as the movement that directly treats that genre as lesser artistically. What it displays to me is that you view equality between pop and rock as something that places pop in a position above rock, a position of favoritism, even if the movement overtly calls for equal standing and not greater. Given how you feel it's intrinsically tied to LGBTQ rights, what does that tell us about your views on that topic?
And on top of that, a little bit less important than what he just said, but you telling me gay people ain't disenfranchised, homie?
Oh, yeah, fuck. Yeah, that's an implication that could only be made by a straight white guy.
Isn't Doesn't he, like, have Vietnamese, though?
I stand by my statement. Straight white guy is a mindset.
And this is why Drake, as a pop rapper, seems to have no respect at all anymore. Rap music was already connected to something culturally important. It has been since its inception. Being pop means nothing here because there's not really a whole lot aesthetically gay about any of this.
What do you... Most pop ain't aesthetically gay. No, it gets worse.
Kendrick said some things in this feud that kind of border on homophobic. Has a whole song about being late to the party on this issue.
Oh, wow, you're right. That line was not about Drake being gay. That was about him not liking women as people. It was about misogyny. It means he likes pussy, but not women. I mean, I suppose the whole thing about him popping ass could be seen as homophobic through the right lens, but yeah, borderline is about right. It might even be a bit of a stretch, but I get why you might say that about other lines, but only really get it here if you're bad at lyrical right. Todd in the Shadows. Yeah, that tracks.
Hey, about Anti-Diaries, I don't know how you expect an elementary schooler in the early 90s, as in the actual perspective the song is from, to be late to the party. And in fact, part of the point of that line in particular is to highlight how children tend to not know any better. But you kind of put this out here as though it's from the point of view of present-day Kendrick.
Wait. So, Todd heard some lyrics on Mr. Morale and misconstrued them to give Kendrick some kind of major problem that doesn't fucking exist? Yeah. If I were you, Todd, I'd avoid any further comments that make it easier to compare you to Drake. I'm pretty sure Jacob has a Rolodex for those kind of jokes. A Rolodex. One Rolodex. Yeah, okay. Actually, hold on. How many stocks do I really got in stock?
And Drake said things that were just homophobic straight up.
Your music getting played in all the spots where boys got a little more pride.
In fact, Kendrick straight up admitted that he enjoyed Drake the pop star, not the rapper.
And yet you call Kendrick's side of this a takedown of poptimism, when Drake is the one saying that a pop star appeals primarily to the gays. Drake is the only one in this beef that said being a pop star was a bad thing when he critiqued Kendrick for working with pop stars. Drake is the one who disses operate under the purview of the homophobic version of rockism that you have presented. Somehow I doubt you're gonna get why this doesn't make sense, but I sure as hell hope my audience does.
Making pop connects you to something important. Making pop rap disconnects you from it.
Okay, but you just said that rap was about the disenfranchised and pop was about the gays. So, you are saying that gay people aren't disenfranchised? Todd, homie, this is what pretending to be an ally looks like.
And Kendrick just lays all that out in devastating detail.
Once upon a time, all of us was in chains. Homie still double down, calling us some slaves.
Who was he calling slaves, Todd?
Do gay black people just not exist? Yeah, I guess not. Sorry, Frank Ocean, you ain't real no more.
I mean, considering how often people even see him, I guess you could... Never mind.
You'd think that if anyone was going to make the case for pop rap as a worthy genre, it'd be Drake, who's been playing both sides of the hits credibility divide for a long time. Like, he was one of the big three. He was respected. But it turns out he was the absolute worst person to make a case for pop rap. His shit hasn't been good in years, and it's all sucked for the same reason pop music in general sucks. The shallowness, the trend writing, the numbers chasing.
Wait a minute, didn't you say that shallow was a dumb criticism earlier? Like, specifically shallowness? But now it's a reason that pop music sucks?
And I'm not going to ask for detail here because I get that it would take a bit and the video isn't really about Drake's body of work, on top of the fact that you say other aspects that could be argued to explain why it's shallow. But the issue here is the hypocrisy. It's a bad criticism for Drake until you say it.
The callow attaching himself to whatever hot newcomer pops up in the scene.
Which is also one of the big criticisms of Drake that a lot of people levied against him, and why so many people he worked with no longer like him. Like, Future? And The Weeknd? And as the resident Weeknd enjoyer around here, thank God he never signed his life away, because another issue is the Drake stimulus package may as well be the EA acquisition package, because he sucks the artistic credibility dry out of a lot of rising artists, and then tosses them aside. Unless, of course, he needs to make a sudden album right after somebody dissed him in order to gain back some sort of credibility.
Unless he needs to do that, then he just pulls him out of the closet.
Yeah, funny how you know that that's a problem, but pretend people aren't saying it when it was kind of the catalyst for this entire stage of the beef.
The Drake phenomenon has become painfully hollow, and all that pretentious shit about authenticity we're told doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. It matters a lot.
Once again, that was never the point. What you're describing is a twisting of poptimism into fame worship, but not poptimism itself. The point of dismissing the veil of authenticity is not so much about authenticity itself, but rather redefining the rules by which something is authentic, allowing authenticity to be felt rather than adhere to a methodology. What happens is that, like any communicated message, the nuance gets wrung out of it to mean authenticity doesn't matter, but it does. You can have other writers and still be authentic if what you're doing is working with other people to create clarity in your message. Electronic instruments are just as valid as traditional ones when it comes to expressing emotions through notation, because the instrument is only as good as the one using it. You can put an entire narrative structure into a video and still very directly say things that relate to the wider world around you. You can play a character and still express your real thoughts while doing so, and any and all art should be subject to criticism, both positive and negative.
But relevant to what's going on here, so should the critic. Todd, I'm gonna be real with you, homie. I just fucking hate your ass. I hate the way that you walk, the way that you talk. I hate the way that you dress, the way that you dismiss the culture you're talking about, unless it's European, interestingly enough. The way you think about music. I even hate the way you play fucking piano at the start of the video. Fucking Linus ass goofy bitch. Charlie Brown your ass and bald head with a peanut. I think you got the impression how I feel about you by now, so I'm gonna pass over to my boyfriend. Don't speak on any culture if you ain't gonna at least learn it on the surface level again. And I mean any culture.
I'm pretty sure you know what he meant by any culture, right? To be quite honest, I get the impression you were trying to give a broader, socially relevant angle, but kind of forced it in to the point where instead of presenting something cool, you said a lot of things that mean what I don't think you realize they do. Like, it is kind of homophobic, and hopefully unintentionally so. And even then, hopefully not in the way where it's a mask slip for underlying prejudice. Just do better, I guess. Read a book. Maybe.
Damn, Todd. Like, this was bad. And let me make something really clear right now. I could have gone even further, I promise. There's a few things after where I stopped that I could have addressed, but I didn't feel like I was really going to get anywhere close to the height of where I'm leaving off at. You were overly dedicated to the big steps that you made to jump to the conclusions that you came to, but instead of putting you on the moral high ground, you wound up with about 80 sections of contradictions in a video that comes across just plain unmastered, with each of the small poor choices resulting in a butterfly effect that results in a mad video that thinks that it's good. And I get no excitement from telling you how much this failed to live up, because you've made videos that I've enjoyed before, but, well, there's some cold, hard truth I think is relevant to you as a whole that kind of leads me towards this. Todd, you are not a critic. Not a real critic, anyway. You're just a kind of a guy who talks about music. I'm not saying that you never were a critic, but I think your abilities as a critic are limited, and based on what I've seen, they've just been exhausted. I felt exhausted by the music review stuff, but I stopped when I saw what I was making was just not going to keep working, and I focused on making something else. Part of that was also me making music for myself a little bit more often. Well, I kind of realized something in the process. People who review media without actually having much, if any, experience in creating that media have a tendency to fall off in how relevant their media criticisms are in the long term. I want to bring up an example of someone you're probably really familiar with, Doug Walker, aka Nostalgia Critic. And as bad as he is on several different levels as a person and a content creator, I would like to look at the time he paused Nostalgia Critic to make Demo Reel. Now, part of the reason nobody liked Demo Reel is because it wasn't what they wanted from Doug. It in and of itself wasn't really that great. None of the Nostalgia Critic movies really are. But one thing that break from reviewing movies in order to make film, even in a shorter format like that, was a recharge and a means of alignment with the medium he reviewed. In other words, I think it was actually good for his long-term success as the Nostalgia Critic because it gave him more of an insight behind the lens as a filmmaker. What Rap Critic has to say about rap tends to remain relevant as well because, well, he makes rap. It's one of the many reasons I find it a lot harder to respect DJ Academics than Joe Budden. Axe never stepped in a booth in his life, while Joe has a lot of experience in that lifestyle. Again, one of the many reasons. Don't get that misconstrued. This is part of what I think is happening with Todd. He's never really made music. He plays piano, sure, but composition? Not something he's done. And on top of his views of what popular music is and why it's popular being dated, what makes him even more stagnant is his disconnect from the compositional structure of music. I mean, think about it. How much of this review was actually about the song he's reviewing? I think there's one point he plays where he talks about Kendrick being good enough to make this type of song and throw an academic lecture in the middle of it, and that's honestly all he says in relation to the song itself, instead focusing on this whole meta-narrative about pop music as a whole, as though he's not really convinced that what he has to say is even good enough. So that's basically my advice. Write a song, Todd. Make an album, Todd. Shut your hoe ass up and make some music, Todd. Holy shit, I just realized, did you just
Yes, even GNX is in there.